We are meeting in West BE Basement West location, and we are joined by our committee members and by the public via Zoom. It's just kind of remarkable that when life happens, we can still get ourselves together. Appreciate Jerry for all of his efforts to make this and simultaneous meetings happen all over the place. Thank you very much, Jerry. We're grateful to have Sarah Young here with us, keeping us organized, and we have tech support. We're grateful to have our board members. We have three of us here with Jenny Earl and Emily Green and myself, Randy Booth. I'm chairing this committee today. And then on Zoom, we have Natalie Klein and Sarah Reel. And we have Patty. And we're going to have a lot of Talia looks like she's there. I can't quite read the screen. I should have brought my other glasses. But anyway, anybody else that's here, you're welcome. And we hope that you'll all feel comfortable jumping in and participating fully in the agenda that we have organized for today. We're going to begin with some recognitions of what's been happening in the last month, and I'll be happy to turn the time over to Patty, Jennifer, and Michael for this item 3.1.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And this is an exciting day, especially it's a great follow-up to yesterday's meeting. I think it ended, about 11:15 p.m., but you can still feel the energy, even though I'm in a separate location, about everything that will be done today. This is an exciting agenda, and so I'm going to start out with the recognition. And we also have Michael Hakkarainen and Director Thronson on here, and Katie Dewey-Hill. But I'm going to start by reading the piece that really frames the structure of our work as staff, which is a Utah State Board of Education is committed to the vision of, upon completion, all Utah students are prepared to succeed and lead by having the knowledge and skills to learn, engage civically, and lead meaningful lives. In order to accomplish these goals, staff of the board are engaged in supporting the everyday work to achieve this goal, in assisting the board to create equitable conditions for student success, advocating for necessary resources, developing policy, and providing effective oversight and support. So this month, we highlight the work in the following area that deserves recognition, that really does support the board's strategic plan by supporting LEAs and providing personalized learning for each student, by increasing access to qualified school personnel, and to design personalized learning plans to partner with teachers, families, and students, and also to promote new school system models for personalized learning implementation. This really is in support and direction by the board in order to achieve the strategic plan. So Michael, we're going to turn it over to you, because on January 20th, 2023, over 200 Utah educational leaders gathered at the Nebo Summit Center in Springville, Utah, for the very first Magellan Summit, which was a unique one-day conference designed to provide leaders, coaches, teachers, technology specialists, school board members, and legislators an opportunity to share successful implementing personalized competency-based learning strategies. The in-person crowd was also joined by nearly 300 online participants who attended presentations and Zoom events, a resource supported by our partners at UATN. So Michael, turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Superintendent Norman and Chair Booth and members of the committee. I'm Michael Hakkarainen. I'm a teacher specialist with digital teaching and learning and personalized competency-based learning. The Magellan Summit was a big success. Participants at the event had the opportunity to select from 30 different breakout sessions that were provided by Utah educators who've been leading the way in personalized competency-based learning strategies. We also had a group of professional learning experts invited from USBE thought partners like Learner Center Collaborative, who we've worked with, Marzano, and the Mastery Transcript Consortium. There were 3 Ignite sessions that kicked off the day from Kareem Farah, the founder of the Modern Classroom Project, Joey Lee from Lift Learning, and Aaron Ashley from the New Teacher Project. And we ended with a closing keynote from Dr. Katie Martin. The real reason this event was a success, however, is because of all the hard work completed by our team at USBE, including Emily Berry, Melanie Durfee, Rick Gaisford, Leslie Means, and Amber Wright. And we also have to acknowledge the incredibly talented Katie Hill. She's here, wave Katie, quality instruction team coordinator who helped open the summit with her amazing accordion playing, singing, and songwriting skills. While all of these presentations were simultaneously streamed on Zoom events, they were also recorded for sharing on the just released eMedia PCBL Hub, which was created in partnership with UETN. This is available now at emedia.uen.org/hubs/PCBL. I'll put that link in the chat in just a second. It is open to the public, so board members, parents, teachers, everyone can access it. When you get there, you're going to find USBE's definition of personalized competency-based learning and the PCBL grant program, which is defined by Utah Code 53F-5-5. There are links to USBE resources and materials, including our PCBL framework and Utah's Portrait of a Graduate and many other supporting documents. We have a collection of online resources curated in collections aligned to the PCBL framework components like culture of learning, learner agency, demonstrated competency and assessment, customized supports, social and emotional learning. And there's access to collaborative groups for the PCBL Review Committee and each of the 4 cohorts of schools that are currently participating in the PCBL grant program. Each month, we're going to be uploading more resources to the collection areas, along with artifacts that are collected by USBE specialists, highlighting the work that's being done here by Utah educators. We're really excited about the energy and enthusiasm that was generated at the Magellan Summit for educators that are invested in evolving to a learner-centered environment, and the potential to maintain this momentum with the eMedia PCBL Hub. I want to give special thanks to this endeavor to Katie Garrett, who is on the Zoom call. I don't know if her camera's on, but Katie is one of my favorite human beings and a great colleague who's done a tremendous amount of work to set up this hub and to help us to bring together some of the resources. And I also want to thank Katie Blunt, who, believe it or not, down here in C Forum at St. George, she's sitting right next to me. Katie Blunt, another one of my favorite human beings at UETN, and she's just done a great job of helping to create support documents and materials for the hub to get it up and running for teachers to use. And we're just really excited about this. I'll drop the link to it in the chat in case anybody wants to take a look at it now, and just say thank you all so much for your time and for highlighting this work.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to feel of your enthusiasm, even if it is over Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you. And correction, I just noticed that the chat is disabled in this Zoom meeting, so I won't be able to share it that way, but we'll get it out to you guys. Thank you very much.
Michael, if you would like to send me the link, I'd be glad to send it to everyone on the call today.
That would be great. Thank you, Andrea. Just like to invite those of you when you speak to project a little bit as if you were in drama class, because there's a little bit of echoey quality to our meeting so far today, and I would love to hear every word. So make sure that you're using your very best projection, and let's communicate with one another. All right, back to you, Patty.
Thank you. When we talked about this being a special committee today, when we very first started, there was actually no agenda items for this month. And then board leadership and your board leadership here as well in standards and assessment talked about what a great opportunity it would be to be able to provide learning opportunities as well along the way. So we were learning and growing together and can provide information that wasn't actionable at that point in time. And we could have a really great discourse about it. So the first part of this is going to be with Director Jennifer Thronson, and she has been asked.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we do have one person for public comment.
Yes. And so we'll have public comment and keep you in suspense for the rest.
All right. Andrea, do we still have just one?
Yes, we just have one public comment. She should be here on Zoom. Monica Wilbur, if she will unmute. She was here. Oh, there she is.
I see her name down at the bottom. I'm not sure. Are you there, Monica?
I am, Chair Booth. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Monica yesterday in our live meeting, and she set it out for hours upon hours upon hours. So you definitely should get at least your 3 minutes after enduring so well what you endured yesterday. Let's go ahead and hear from you, Monica, and invite you to speak up clearly so that we can hear you.
All right, I will. Thank you, Chair Booth. I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you today. After Israeli intelligence succumbed to the disastrous consequences of groupthink in the Yom Kippur War in 1973, the Mossad instituted what's known as the 10th man rule, which requires a lone person to challenge assumptions and provide evidence contrary to that of the overwhelming majority. Knowing what I know with a certainty, I feel compelled to continue to challenge the narrative around personalized competency-based learning as an instructional, curricular, and assessment approach that uses tech tools and platforms to inform, monitor, and score students' attitudes, values, and characters. It is completely irredeemable and under no circumstances acceptable. The Chinese have an entire social credit system premised on this very notion, and no amount of confetti thrown in my face as a parent can convince me to celebrate such a violation of my children's individual conscience and free will. But the use of PCBL on our children is only the tip of the iceberg. One USBE document shows high-level staff members discussed applying the Utah State Board's PCBL framework to, and I quote, creating a families portion similar to the educator and student sections. This meant that USBE staff envisioned creating expectations of how families were to comply with PCBL. Other documents never released to board members discuss applying the PCBL principles to, quote, educator and administrator evaluations, and even to state board members in the rulemaking process. This personalized aspect means collecting highly personal information on everyone. No child or adult will be left untouched. Both the public and this committee deserves to know of these disturbing facts about PCBL. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Monica. All right, now, am I correct?
Yes.
Kind of operating here a little bit disadvantaged in terms of what I normally would have in front of me, but I think that next we have item 3.3, standards revision and implementation processes. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And we will have Dr. Thronson, and also we have Director Talia Longhurst, who will be presenting as well. Thank you. One point of clarification. How would you like to proceed? Would you like to proceed in going through the slide deck first and answering, or section by section, or just answering questions along the way?
You know, we have master teachers in charge, so I would leave it to them how they feel that the information they have to present could be best assimilated by those who are participating. If you feel that they're needs to be a break for questions at certain times, then we're totally open to that. But I'm just excited about the content that is going to be shared today, and I'll leave it to our professionals to determine how that would best be presented.
Thank you.
I think that's my cue. So good morning, Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. Talia and I will kind of tag team here as we have different processes for different types of standards. And so I'll cover the ones that are core, although I do believe CT is core in my mind, but we call it non-core. So that will be your distinction as we move through. So we'll kind of go through a two-part process. The first part is just understanding the multiple standard processes we have based on the type of standards. And what the law requires and where the law has more flexibility. And then we'll transfer to Talia to let her do the non-core kind of processes and procedures. And then we'll get into like how are standards actually developed? What's the difference between standards and curriculum? What are the resources, kinds of training that we do with our writers to help them to write great standards, those kinds of things. So that's kind of the trajectory for this next 60 to 90 minutes. This is a long section. I will pause throughout to ask for questions for clarification where I'm like, okay, we've covered that section thoroughly. What have I left off that you might need more clarity around? And that way, you know, you don't have to wait 60 to 90 minutes for those questions, but probably every 10 minutes or so, I will pause and provide those opportunities. As cognitive science would tell you, you can only take so much of me before you need a break. So every 10 minutes or so, we will pause. I'm going to check on my voice level. Chair Booth, is it okay? I'm a low speaker from what I'm told. I sound really loud in my head. So just checking in on sound.
I believe that we've got kind of some feedback happening just because we have so many microphones open. And so I'm wondering if perhaps those that are not presenting right now, if they might mute themselves and see if we get a little bit less of that sound bleeding into the overall sound that we're experiencing here. So if
They muted Chair Booth, so I'm going to hold just a moment.
Chair Booth, you're muted. The room is muted.
It takes a minute to come back on, just so
Okay.
y'all know. So it's the slow burn. For those of you that haven't had fun in Basement West, if you mute the mic in the room, it takes 60 seconds for it to come back. So it's just part of the technology that, having presented in there many times, I'm like, oh, it's the 60-second time.
That's, well, it's good to know, or else we can't hear you.
Yeah, right? I'm like, I have
So,
emojis
you turn
today.
it off so we can hear them.
Okay, they are back on.
proceed.
All right, perfect. Here we go. Let's take us through the process and design of standards. So starting with core standards, Utah Code requires the state board to do this. So I'll give you just a moment to read that as you are all literate adults. So this is explicitly from code. And so as we get to what code, I will be going to those code sections next for your reference. There is a document in your backup that has all the hyperlinks to everything that we'll cover today. So it's in the order of the presentation. So if you're like, where is it? If we're starting with kind of code and rule, all of that will start the document. And then as we move through, you'll see different resources as we go. So if you want to look explicitly and be like, where is this part in code? You'll be able to find it. All right, so if that's our job, is those knowledge, skills, and competencies of what kids are supposed to acquire, these are all of the different laws and policies. So I'm actually going to take you to each one and highlight really briefly what each one articulates, so that if you want to explore deeper, or if we want to pause any of those, we certainly can. But I think it's really helpful to know what's in the law that we have to do, and then where the board's authority comes in of what we can do, or things that the board decides that we will do. So the first one, and I'm going to share my screen a little differently so that it will just share whatever is on my screen. There we go. Is 53. E-4-202, and I need to make that bigger. This one's basically just tells us what the priorities for the state are, which you'll see communication as a priority, mathematics, the ability to analyze, access, and apply information. So some of those higher level thinking skills. And then what the board is not allowed to do, which we've talked about, we're not allowed to require a particular curriculum for LEA to use unless in statute. Just kind of those, we cannot require people to use anything like in the instruction materials area. We can recommend, we can provide, supports, but they also have the choice. And then the basic knowledge and skills you'll see is primarily focused here on ELA and math. Specifically, you've got some additional like subcomponents of those areas. And then below are the process that the statute requires. So when we just updated the process we'll look at here shortly on the core standards, there are parts of that process that are required by this code. So things like we've got to put the draft out for on our website and on the Utah Public Notice, and it needs to be out for 30 days. Like those pieces aren't up for board change. Those pieces are in statute unless we go and seek that change. We have to conduct 3 public hearings around different regions of the state whenever we have draft standards out. And so that's part of our typical process in standards revision for core standards. And the reason I say core, you'll see which standards in the next code section are required. So I'm actually going to go through what makes the most sense. These are the ones that are required by statute for the state board to have a established process for. Specifically a timeline, which we'll look at here in just a moment. But English language arts, mathematics, science, social studies, fine arts, physical education, health, and early childhood. Those are all the ones that the statute requires the board to develop and have. And a timeline that says, when will those standards review committees be coming up? And that timeline was established a few years ago, and we'll visit that here as part of the presentation. But just wanted you to know the reason we have that timeline is it's required by code. And then we have to have a separate standards review committee for each subject. So we always have new review committee members proposed by the board as well as the legislature. And you'll see that in here, who gives us who for that or whom for that standards review committee. And then you've got at least 1 year before we take a formal action. And you all know our standards review process takes like 2 or 3. So we are always ahead of the 1 year requirement. And the review committee has to meet at least twice. So as you look at our process today, I just wanted to kind of highlight what the law has so that you know we didn't just make this up or like, why do we have that component? Most of it is driven by the code and then what the board has kind of established since adding to that. This part gets into who needs to be on that standards review committee, who looks at our current standards and gives a recommendation to the board as to whether those standards need to be revised. And if so, here's the kind of recommendations that they have. And this is just kind of the makeup of how that happens and what our requirements are for that process. So that's 53E 202 and 203 or 4-202, 203. The next one is related to standards and graduation. So you think, oh, we're done with standards because those are the 2 code sections, but there is one more that is right after this that takes you through that the state shall establish rigorous core standards for graduation requirements. So when we look at the supplemental standards courses today, that is why we have a different process that is required for graduation requirements. If it's a course that you can take to earn towards graduation, then it's required to have standards. And that is something that we only realized a couple of years ago. And so our staff in teaching and learning has been developing standards with supportive teachers in the community and experts in areas such as yoga for physical education. We had yoga being taught as a way to earn your physical education graduation credit, but there weren't actual dedicated standards for yoga. So the board approved those a few years ago. And we'll look at that today in terms of what has been created, what is yet to be created, what is still coming to the board. So you get a sense of where we are, where we've been, and where we're going. And this also gives the current graduation requirements, the minimums that are required. Our board has chosen to go above and beyond those minimums that are in code. And also here's your financial literacy that you guys worked on last night. So all of those pieces are here, and we're also required to have competency-based standards of assessment for elective courses. The way that we accomplish that is if a LEA wants to offer an elective course, they have to base it on the standards of that for that course. So they have to say, we're going to have an aerospace course, and we're going to lean on the science standards for that course, and we are going to actually give USBE what we are going to use as our standards, but that is developed at the local level. So lots of information there. I'm going to pause on those 3 pieces of code because they're pretty specific, and we will get into what our process is later. So if you're more about like, what do we do here, that's coming. But if you have any questions specifically about what those code sections are or want to talk about that, I will pause and give that opportunity.
Are there any questions? Oh,
All right, that was long enough to grab your unmute button, which takes a while if you're at home sometimes. So we will move to the next couple of pieces. The next one is we are required by state code to report on our core standards and kind of where we are in the process annually in the superintendent's report. So this superintendent's report has many requirements, but part of this code is that we report on our standards and where we are in development and review and all of that annually. So you'll see in the annual superintendent's report, we do update. So we had a piece in there about the social studies standards because they were up for review. We had a piece on English language arts, and we also discussed the standards that weren't queued due to the board saying, we don't see a compelling need to do this, even though our timeline says so. All the other data we have for world languages, fine arts, there's one more, library, didn't compel the board to proceed on. So we've put them back into the queue. And that was also in the annual report. So those are the types of pieces just for requirements by code for you to be aware of. And then the final piece, this is a board policy that enhances what's in 202 and 203, specifically around that revision process. So if this is basically the only piece that we have besides the actual process that the board has approved that dictates some of the work. So there is a core standards rubric that we use annually each year, and we submit those results to this committee, and then they go to the full board, usually in the fall, September or October. And in that review, staff goes through, answers the questions. We also do a standards survey that goes out to the public. We get usually thousands of responses on that, and then I sort through that data and provide the themes to the board for their understanding and knowledge and any questions they might have. So like this past fall, there's a huge call for music education in the school system. People would like to see more opportunities for kids to take music. And so the board has taken some of that to expanding BTS to allow that opportunity, especially in our elementary schools, to have more opportunities for the potential of music. Then if there's a revision warranted, that we go ahead and start that standards review process, which is where we'll get to here shortly, and then how the standards review committees are designed, which is basically a copy and paste of code, and then what that committee process is. So this is just the standards review committee and what we do within that, but it is not the entire process. We've only put into policy that actual committee that's required by code in this board policy over the years. That is it for law and policy that drives everything standards for core subjects. When Talia leads, she'll probably have different ones that drive for her. All right, so for the core standards revision process, you coming in, for those of you that are new, you walked into a couple different processes that are going on for core standards. So English language arts is finishing up. They're on step 9 of 12, and they are on the 2020 process that we'll look at here. The future standards that you will see on this committee will be under the 2023 process that was updated recently. That was finalized in December 2022, but ultimately will go into use in 2023. So that's how I'm distinguishing the two. The 2020 process is where English language arts are. The board is kind to staff and saying, we won't switch the revision process on you in the middle of a revision. So whenever we update this process, it is for the next set of standards. So currently ELA has been using this for 18 months or so. And so they will finish out hopefully in the next 3 to 4 months. And then we will retire this version and move into the new version for new standards. So this is available again in that document that I shared with you as part of board backup. You can click and find the 2020 resources. I'm actually just going to go grab, maybe if I had folder is not showing. 1 minute. Grab it so that you can see what I'm referring to. This document will be kind of your go-to document anytime you're like, what about those standards? And I'm just gonna blow this up so it's a little better to see. Oh, that is not the right document. Hold on, that's a different word. There it is. So this is the document that hopefully you're kind of clicking through as we go. I tried to put some highlights in that document. So here's all the code and board policy pieces. And now we're down here at the core standards revision process. So you can see the 2020 versus that 2022, which I call the 2023 because it will enact in 2023 with the math standards. So with that said, we will pop back. This is the current process. So where we are right now, where it's out for 30-day review for English language arts, as you all know. We've got a couple more weeks for board members to give feedback. We will bring those revisions for review and approval by the full board, either in a special session or in full board. So we're getting close to completion in ELA. But when we think about math, which is queuing next, and we do expect it to be needed to go ahead and move forward, that we will be queued in the fall. We will be under the new process, which is the 2023. The benefits of the process changes, I think, for those of you that are new or those that have been here, but really thinking about how does this benefit us as a board, is there's more input from the board earlier in the process. So in the 2020 version, we would bring the standards review committee feedback back to the board and say, here's their recommendations. And the board would say, okay, and we would start the standards revision process. Now in the 2023, we will bring the committee's recommendations back to the board. The board will give input on those recommendations, whether to accept or deny, those recommendations. That will be the board's authority, as well as provide their own recommendations and move staff to be able to take to the writing committees from the get-go, from the early steps of the process, so that we can take your feedback into account from the beginning all the way through the process, instead of our current process really brought that board input in, it's like step 9 instead of step 3. And so this will hopefully alleviate some of the correcting on the back end that ends up happening and takes you all as board members a lot of time because that input wasn't provided earlier. So you'll see some significant changes in terms of the opportunities for board members to provide that feedback along the way. So I'll pause there. Any questions about the different processes, as well as just the changes? Perfect. All right. Next up then is the standards timeline, which I shared with you is required by code. But for you to know, like, what's coming next, when do I get to see these standards? This is our current, I always put draft because it changes every year on it, but this is the updated version. And this is on our website. So anytime that you want to be like, which one's coming next, you can go to our website, type in the standards revision timeline, and you'll be able to find this document in its current form. So last kind of couple of years, we had different standards. So on the left are the standards that are required by code in blue. The other standards that the board has done over the years, world languages, library, and driver education, aren't actually required by that statute, but we do have standards for those. And what school year we would begin the development process and when we would expect them to be implemented and assessed if they're a part of our English language arts, math, or science assessments. So right now you can see next school year math is up for reviewing and revision. Likely to, if we make it through the 2 years, to adopt and introduce those standards, implement in the 3rd year, and then start assessing in the 4th year. That's the typical expectation. What you'll notice about this timeline is, in general, we do about 7-year cycles. So we do social studies. We just finished PK6. It will come back up in 7 years. The board will take a look at the data we bring to say, is this really needed? Do we delay? Do we go ahead and move forward? The board can also, we bring feedback every year. We might suggest a revision sooner than the 7 years. This whole process that the board has built is very nimble in meeting the needs, whether that means the statute change and we need to make changes to the standards, whether that means research has changed so significantly that we really do need to change our practice, those kinds of things. So this is just the sheet that kind of tells you what is expected. And you'll notice we do try and not do big adoptions all at the same time. So ELA versus math, we try and separate those by 2 or 3 years because those are pretty heavy lifts for communities. Whereas health, for example, is a smaller number of educators impacted by those standards. So you'll see health, driver education, and preschool could all be in the same year because it's a smaller end size of educators impacted by those changes. So we do keep in mind those kinds of parts to ensure that our LEAs aren't overwhelmed by the process. So that's the timeline. It's linked in your piece. The queuing rubric, this is the part we do every fall. So on the Standards and Assessment Committee, we will bring to you for every content area that has standards that you just saw in that timeline, this queuing rubric. And this is last year's queuing rubrics, just so you can kind of see what they look like. The questions that staff are asked to attend to, we use an annual standards survey here that we administer every fall and goes out to the public. And again, we get thousands of survey takers. And then we use that to distinguish what percent of the population is concerned about these standards, what percent are not concerned, to be able to elevate the point value across this rubric. And that's been really helpful and has truly driven our standards process in a lot of ways. What we found is once you get to a 0.4 or higher, we typically see a need to revise. So you'll see English language arts is up for revision, and they were at a 0.42. This has been pretty typical for the past 3 years, that when we hit that 0.4, it does seem to be aligning with that need that is coming from the community, coming from our survey data, that a change is warranted. Whereas you might see like this one, 0.15, the arts were up this year. They were up for queuing of revision. And when we went out and asked arts educators, when we looked at this core standards survey, we did not see a compelling why to change those standards, nor did the board, and therefore they were not queued and they were put back into the revision cycle. And that 0.15 was a good indicator of why they weren't needed to be reviewed. So this has been a tool we worked on with the board over the years to perfect, and has really proven to serve our purpose well for determining if standards are necessary to go through revision. As you know, a standards revision process requires teachers to receive professional learning. It typically requires new instructional materials. It requires time, energy, and effort by all educators in the system. And we take it really seriously when we make those changes to standards, because it's a lot of work on all parts of the system and it's costly. And so it's a very intentional process. Like I said, the annual core standards survey we give every year. This one, I put in the results from the 2022. I basically take those thousands of data points. This year, you can see we had 2,555 responses with 2,100 that were fully completed. So some people partially started and were like, I'm good. Some people made it all the way through. We take all the data, whether they complete or not, and use it, just so you know. And then just kind of looking at the first year we did this, I think because it was new, we had 92. In the last couple of years, we've been consistent at about 2,500 folks. And you can see the breakdown of the percentage of people participating. We get a lot of educators and parents, and some students in another kind of category. And then in that survey, we ask them how satisfied they are with the different core standards, and give that data to our staff to help with that rubric, but also to this committee. The committee gets the same data every year. And then we summarize those queuing rubric results for the committee to help make those decisions on should anything be queued earlier. And then I go through it's a lot of qualitative data. We ask them, like, please describe in detail your concerns related to whatever standards they say that they might have concerns over. And then they go through and they tell us what those concerns are. And then I go through that data and code it into themes to be able to give the board kind of a summary of that data, of things that they might want to consider as we think about revisions or just those content areas in general. So you've got that data from last year just to kind of help you see what the feedback was. We do this every year, so you'll be able to see it this fall of where people currently are in the system. I think at that part, yeah, I'm going to pause there. Any questions about the survey, the queuing rubric, or the timeline? Okay, Chair, if you're okay, I'm going to proceed on. All right. So next up is just the supplemental. So everything we just did was core standards, think ELA, fine arts, health, PE, all of that. Supplemental standards are our core content courses that are graduation credit earning, but aren't necessarily English 9. This would be more like speech and debate. Courses that count for English credit, but aren't the core course of English 9, secondary one, for example, like we have Math for Life, which is a math credit, but it's not the core classes that every kid's required. It's an optional math credit course they can take to earn towards their math credits. So in this process, there is a specific board process currently, which I believe we'll be discussing later in this meeting, of potential changes to that process. We've only had a supplemental standards process since December of 2019. It's rather new for us. It was something that when I took this role and started reading the code sections in teaching and learning, we realized we were out of compliance, and we came to the board and said, hey, we're required to have supplemental standards for these graduation earning credits per 204. Can you help us get there? And so we based our process on CTE's process, as these were course specific instead of kind of those overarching courses that every kid takes. These were more limited populations and thinking about a smaller subset of students, and some students might take yoga, a bunch of students won't. Some students might take, I'm trying to think of a good one. I can't think of another one. Math for Life, and a lot of kids won't. So it's supplemental courses have a much smaller N size versus secondary one. Every kid takes secondary one or comps out of it. So this was the kind of process that the board landed on, is how would we go about when we had a bunch of courses to develop. And so we needed kind of a process for how we prioritize which courses got developed first, knowing we need to develop all of them. But so what we did is LEA requests, they kind of drove us by saying, yeah, we really would love standards for these courses first. Industry requests, anything there that we were hearing from industry that we really needed to have some standards in those courses. Resequencing effects, like if there was going to be any changes to overall course sequencing for our kids, and then prioritizing based on the number of kids in that course. If we've got to develop 20 courses, we wanted to develop the ones that would impact the most students first, and then slowly over time get to the rest. So at this point, we're about 3 years in. We've done a ton of the courses, which I'll show you here shortly. But the process itself is we would then convene a committee to develop those course standards. It's typically people who teach that course currently and have expertise in it. And then we would release those standards for a 30-day public review, which included our board members to be able to give that review. Then we revise the standards based on that review and bring it to you twice a year. So we come in March, which you'll see us next month with about 8 or 9 sets of standards for individual supplemental courses, and then we come in November. We don't have the meat that Talia has with hundreds of courses, but it's still 9 courses. You saw what happened last meeting when you had 3 courses. You're going to have 9 from us in March, so be ready for an 8 a.m. meeting, I would expect that day. And then that process is, like I said, it's really reflected upon what the CTE department has been doing. It really helped to build our process in how we would go about these individual course standards instead of core standards, those course standards. So I am going to see if I can do this real fast to take you to the folder where all this stuff is. To be able to show you what courses we have designed at this point. Because this was a work in progress and now it is ready for its debut. So we have a sheet that is shared in this document that takes you to where we are with all of the different supplemental standards. So for example, when I get this, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger just for the ease of you on your screens. For English language arts, these are all the courses that we consider supplemental because they're not explicitly required. For example, every kid is required to take 4 credits of English, but they have to take, every kid takes English 9, whether that's honors or whatever, English 10, English 11. But when they get to their 4th year of English, they have options. And we consider anytime we don't tell them the exact course, they have to take a supplemental course, although it's required for graduation. That's what these courses are. So you'll see like 12th grade language arts is the ELA standards, but the basic writing should be on here twice. Fast is anticipated. We're bringing it to you in March of 2024 next year. What we'll be bringing to you in this committee next month is Creative Writing 1, Creative Writing 2, Literacy Magazine, humanities, as well as technical and professional communication. So this sheet's really just to help you to know what's already been board approved, what's coming, and what is in the future to be coming across the core content areas required for graduation. So then you'll see math. Math is completely done. There's nothing new coming for math. Science will have, I think it's 5 or 6 courses coming to you next month, and then they will be completed. Fine arts will be coming back. Their standards are from 2016. So part of this revision process, even for supplemental, is that 7-year cycle. So they'll be bringing you art history, ballroom dance, and technical theater standards. Currently, in the 2016 standards, when fine arts was done, those standards were in the core standards. And so we'll be bringing those supplemental standards updates to you in November. And then all of the PE and health areas have already been completed. So at this point, we're pretty close to completion on supplemental. And then they will just go into that 7-year cycle for revision, like our core standards. So with that said, I will pause as supplemental standards get a little chaotic. You can see here on the screen what we'll be bringing to you in March, just for your heads up. These will be the courses that you'll get to see the individual standards for and give us feedback on prior to full board approval. I did put in one more document that I use with staff to help them to know when they need to do what with people. So currently, if we are headed for the November meeting, this is what they need to do in what month. So right now, next month, they'll start convening their folks around those standards. In April through July, they'll write those standards, then we'll put them out for 30 days. Then we would come back, assuming this process doesn't change later today. Just wanted you to have a feel of how we kind of support staff and having those timelines so that they can meet those expectations to bring them to you in November and March. So with that said, you've seen that catalog. That's what that spreadsheet was, just to kind of take you through. Talia, I thought this would be a nice time. We finished core supplemental, and now it's like, well, we have 2 more processes for you. So Talia, I'm going to stop sharing, and if Chair Booth, if you're okay, I'll hand it off to Talia and let her explain the CTE parts now that we've covered core. I see Patty coming off mute. So
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
Raise your hand, so.
Yes, and Jennifer, thank you for all of that. There was a lot of information. I'm wondering if there needs to be any time for discussion, any questions that you might want staff to consider, or any additional resources you feel might be needed in the areas that Dr. Thronson covered.
Good question.
If
Hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, I was just trying to find where these slides were. I'm on our today's meeting.
So we don't, when I do presentations, we are not required to present our slides in advance. So the slides will be posted after the presentation today.
Okay,
Just,
so
you'll
sorry,
share that's the one
those, right?
nuance.
No, that's okay. I would love to get those just for further study so I can.
Absolutely. I hyperlinked everything. So when you get them, like everything's already in the deck. So hopefully that will help as well, because there's a lot of documents as you've seen today. So we will share that. I send it to Andrea after this meeting, and then she uploads it into Civic Clerk for the full board session.
Perfect. They're very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So the supplemental course standards review is on the same 7-year cycle as the core standards review. Is that correct?
Yes, at this time, that's what the board, we just thought we'd keep that consistency of every 7 years so people would know. We did yoga in 2019. You will see us back at the board in 2026 with yoga.
Director Thronson, if it hits that cycle for review and there's no need for review, right? There's no need to update, then those would just continue on, and then down the road, if there was a need, right? It would be put back in the rubric, and if the rubric itself suggested that there was a need for a change, or it would be back on the 7-year cycle. Is that correct?
For supplemental, we don't have that explicitness. So for core standards, 100% yes. That standard, if it doesn't really show, the board says no. With supplemental, it is currently the way it's designed, and this might be a great part to consider for the standards conversation later, is should we have kind of a cue to determine, is this really needed? Like, does the field think needs to be updated or not? Because that's gone really well with the core standards. And right now, there's nothing that would actually allow staff not to make a revision, because the process is 7 years and there is not a an out from that. So I think you hit on a gap, honestly, Board Member Earl, because we're new to this. We have only been in 3 years. We haven't had that issue yet, but I would imagine in 4 years, I'll be coming to you saying, we have these 10 courses and staff are not hearing from the field that these 4 need to be revised. So we might want to consider that in that supplemental conversation today.
Okay, and I'm just wondering, it may not be necessary for a single course. In other words, if you went through your process and there really wasn't a need to update,
Yeah.
right, then it would just simply be there wasn't anything here to update, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and
Okay.
we would want to be able to have a transparent process so that we would express to you, here's why we think we wouldn't update these prior to us just making that decision. I think that's a part that's lacking in the current process. We just haven't hit that barrier yet because we're so new.
Okay.
I'll make a note for later.
Board Member Klein, you had your hand is up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I was just wondering for the things that are coming next month, where can we find the current documents or standards for those courses so that we can start reviewing them and not wait until the week before?
Wonderful question. So there are no current standards for those courses. That is what we're actually creating, and they will be loaded into board backup for next month's meeting by those board backup dates. That means us a little earlier than what you see in board backup, we can send them out to you as early as they're ready, if that would be of service. Generally, we just put them in board backup and you get access, but I know with having that many courses, it might be helpful. So as soon as staff are ready, if chair, if you guys want to make an action, I don't even know if we need an action, just tell me to do so. We would be happy to email those so you have more time to look at them in advance. It is a number of courses.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. So just as soon as you've got them from staff, you can get them out to the board. That would be very helpful.
No problem. Milo and Naomi are watching, so they have heard the call.
Great. Any other comments or questions from board members? All right, great. Let's continue. This is very helpful.
Okay, I think I am going to take over now. Talia Longhurst, Director of Career and Technical Education. Nice to see you all again. I thought I would pick up, let me share my screen here. I thought I would pick up with, I'm used to Teams. Hold on one second. My apologies. I thought I'd pick up right here with the document that you have in your backup for today and really talk about the 2 processes that Career and Technical Education uses. And they're the right 2 columns. Let's start with the middle column. Jennifer's referred to this a couple of times around individual courses, kind of that non-core. And in Career and Technical Education, we have 3 courses that fall under this. The first one is financial literacy, which you just approved last night. And the other 2 you'll be seeing back in March. And those include college and career awareness and digital literacy. Both of those are middle school courses that fall into this individual course process. The process that you see in black text is the current process. And really, we do these every 3 to 4 years. We stop and assess, is there a change needed? Do we need to look at this? And we start, just as Jennifer described, with looking to the teachers of the course. Where are the standards weak? What is difficult? What might be outdated? And then we begin to work from there. Our timeline is relatively short. We try to do these within a school year timeframe. And again, you can see the process outlined in the black text. So where we are today with the digital literacy and college and career awareness is we're in that step 2 piece, for example. The course is out for the 30-day review process. As soon as those 30 days are up, which should be here relatively shortly, then the writing committee will reconvene, review the public comment, and anything we've gotten from all of you and make any revisions based on that input. And then we bring it back to committee. Our anticipated return date to committee will be in March for you to look at those revisions and move us forward, hopefully, to full board approval. Any questions about that particular process? Okay, then I will move on to our CTE course revision process. So this is something, there's really two parts to it that I wanted to highlight. The first is in board rule. We are required to come to the board via the consent calendar process. We do this usually in the September-ish timeframe every year, and we present our pathways, CTE pathways. Let me pull those up. I'll show you the current ones. Some of you have been through this already, and some of you have not. Hold on a second. Let me stop sharing and my screen is hidden. I'm on a very small screen today. I apologize. Here we go. Okay, so this is what it looks like. This is what you'll see in the September timeframe of each year. And these are our pathways, our CT programs, if you will. The career clusters are what you see in blue, and then the pathways that are unique to Utah and out in our schools are in black. And these programs are what our CT courses are built into. So within every pathway, we have a list of courses that teach the basic knowledge, skills, and competencies for those pathways. It's designed to be a sequence of courses that really lead a student towards careers in this particular area. We look towards higher education to make sure we're aligning with their programs so that it becomes a seamless transition for students as they move from secondary to post-secondary education and training. We also lean heavily on our industry partners to help us understand what current industry standards and needs are so that we make sure we're teaching things that actually will help a student when they leave secondary education to move on into various careers. So this pathway process, again, done through the consent calendar process each September. We usually highlight for you in the document what's changed from year to year so that you're able to determine that quickly just upon glancing at it. And we're happy to always answer any questions that you have about that. When it comes to the actual course revision, again, the current board approved process is in the black text on the right-hand column. And we use a 3 to 4 year rotation schedule for each of our courses. We have a calendar. It's done by pathway. So all of the courses within a particular pathway are reviewed at the same time. And the specialist works with subject matter experts, higher education, and industry partners to be able to look at where we are. Does something need to be changed, or are we good with the standards the way that they currently are? The writing committees convene, work on making any changes that are necessary, and then we come to committee every November to present those to you. So that is the process. It's not as nearly as complicated as the core standards. We try to move quickly. We try to really base changes on industry need because industry needs change so rapidly. That's why we try to be nimble and flexible and continue to keep our students' knowledge, skills, and competencies up to current date so that they're able to move on and to gain those jobs and careers that they are seeking. Any questions about those two processes?
So I have a question, Talia, about the clusters. Are the clusters spread out over a 4-year period? So let's say this year we're looking at whatever the cluster is, and we won't see that cluster again until 4 years from now?
Yes, That is correct. I have that pulled up. It's in Adobe. Hang on one second. This is the problem with using a small screen. Coming back up. So we do have, and we put this in your board backup every fall, every November when we bring standards to you. All of our courses in CTE are on a calendar with a revision cycle. Again, 3 to 4 years. Most of our IT computer science courses generally come up more often because, as you can imagine, the industry standards change so rapidly. And then as needed, we move others up earlier if we have to, but they're on a cycle, and you can see exactly when others will be coming up. So for example, school year 23-24, you can see what we'll be reviewing next year, and you'll see those a year from now in 24. We have approximately 300 CTE courses. So we do try to take them by cluster and rotate them through on that calendar. Does that answer your question, Chair Booth?
It does. Thank you very much.
Hey, Chair Booth, that is where we're at with this presentation. And I hope that it was informative. Of course, any board members, I know that there's board members that are listening in because law and licensing is finished. And I know that there might be some changes as well. And staff, of course, always tries to follow whatever process is told to a T. And so if there's any communication gaps that you feel are in here, or if there's anything that you as a board feel needs to change, then just, of course, open to all of those so that we can follow the process that everyone and the board has approved in any of these areas. I do want to just make one, Dr. Thronson, she stated correctly that when we do a training that is, or a presentation in a meeting, and it's considered a training opportunity, then, or how we're getting information across, then it has been decided, I think it was, from years ago in standards and assessment, that it wouldn't be put in board backup only because there was a difference at that time. And so we'd love feedback right now. The difference was this: if the expectation that is that board members should have reviewed the documents, come in prepared with all of their questions, and then moving forward, then that would be put in prior to a meeting. But if it's a presentation that's a learning opportunity that would develop over time, we put it in as like notes to ourselves to be able to have that on there for you to be able to see. And it can change even like the day before, as you talked with Dr. Thronson. She was listening to some of the comments yesterday that informed part of the presentation today. So it wouldn't be expected that board members would then have access to it prior, just because of that ability to be nimble. And it was teaching in this moment. And the expectation was you didn't have to come prepared with something beforehand. So if you'd like for that to change, just let us know as well. And that's what Dr. Thronson meant by that expectation of having it in there before. It was really the role of the board in not recognizing that all of you didn't have to read through that and have complete understanding before coming in.
Thank you. I think it will be very helpful now to have that slide deck to review what we've learned. I just have to say, I have tremendous admiration for Dr. Thronson, for Dr. Longhurst, and for their teams, for the way that the teams have been organized. When you look at the literal army of highly qualified, committed, lifelong learners are working together to ensure that the standards are given the attention that they need on a regular basis. And it's very transparent. You know when that's going to happen. We can know. I think it's been very helpful for us to be able to see in entirety how the standards across all content areas are developed and updated and implemented, so that we can understand at what points it would be most helpful for our input and our thorough review of those changes that might be coming up in any given year as part of the review cycle. So thank you so much for your efforts to give us a complete rundown, because many of us are being inserted into the program midstream, and many of us didn't know that there was a 2020 version and a 2023 version, and to understand that and to see the development and the historical development of the process is very formative, and I believe will help us improve our efficiency and the level of helpfulness that we can participate in as we go through this process. So thanks for all of those efforts to give us that information. I believe now that, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Norman, we can proceed now with item 3.4. This is again, it's some training on assessment and accountability. Is that correct?
Yes, we have Assistant Superintendent Darren Nilsson, who is on right now, and he is ready to go.
Patty, I was supposed to do like the development process of standards.
Yes, yes.
I
Chair Booth,
apologize, part two.
yeah, here's part two. Would you like for us to continue on this? I think we have it timed today that we do have enough time for all of this. We have, I think, 45 minutes for the assessment piece, and that would still put us within time of that 12:30 deadline with the other two agenda items we had today.
Excellent. I'm not in any way trying to shorten or abbreviate what you've prepared. So please, Dr. Thronson, we're eager students.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. So basically what we're going to take you through next, per request of this committee, is like, how do we prepare and what's the process look like when the writing committees actually get together? So writing a standard, as you all have seen, as you've been trying to craft standards yourself, is a complex process, takes a lot of thought, because we've got to look at what other standards have we written, how do they connect, what's the vertical alignment if there's multiple grade levels, what's the horizontal alignment within the standards. There's a lot of processes, and so we just thought it'd be helpful to provide some of the tools and resources we use with our writing committees to all of you, as well as just kind of what it looks like when we do this process. So that is the intention of this last part. I will keep it short and sweet. It's just kind of a basic overview. It doesn't go into like huge depth or anything, but just some kind of insights into the world of writing standards, and the difference between standards and curriculum, because those often get confused, even by educators. So what we've seen over the years is there's this opportunity to have some clarity around when does something move from being a standard to curriculum. So specifically to kind of start in that board process, we always have a review committee for core standards. And that standards development process starts with reflecting upon the current standards in that committee. That review committee is people recommended from the House and the Senate and from the board. And those 15 people come together to say, hey, what do we like about what we have? What don't we like? Do these need to be revised? Are they good enough? Those kinds of things. And they make recommendations to the board. Then those are brought for the board's consideration. And in the new model, the board will also bring their recommendations of what they would like to see in the revised standards moving forward. And a key driving element of how we kind of formulate once we get to writing committee is we have them really take into account the board's strategic plan. What is the board trying to accomplish? Because if we really want to be successful in accomplishing those big rocks, we have to focus on the pieces in those big rocks. So the strategic plan becomes kind of a really strong artifact for our writing committees to look at and say, oh, we're looking for high quality instruction and early learning, or we're looking to personalize teaching and learning for our educators and students. Some of those different aspects found in the strategic plan. We look at high quality instruction, personalized teaching and learning, reports over graduate alignment to make sure, like, as we're building standards, are those creating the conditions for kids to acquire those knowledge, skills, and dispositions from Utah's Portrait of a Graduate. We also look at graduation requirements, we look at code, we look at rule. Basically, we kind of collect everything that the writers might need to know that it should be used as a leverage point as they think about what those future of the standards should look like. So they're taking those recommendations from the committee, they'll take the recommendations from the board, They'll look at what's required in code, what's required in rule. They'll look at some of the seminal documents here at USBE, and they'll take all of that together to start to say, okay, if that's what we're trying to achieve, how do we create standards that create those conditions? So that's the first part. What is a standard? So starting with what it is, the way that it's articulated in our work at USBE is core standards is an articulation of the demonstrated proficiency to be obtained. So I used to be the literacy coordinator. One of our standards is that kids will be able to read grade level material in each of the grade bands. And so that's a standard. We want kids to be able to read grade level material. Do we tell them what that book is or what text they have to read? No, that would be curriculum, but we do expect them to read grade level material. A standard represents the essential element of learning that's expected. That's a great standard to give you a replication of a standard that says, we want you to do this thing. This thing is read on grade level, for example. So we want to be very explicit about what kind of learning is expected. Now, when we think about standards versus curriculum, I found this great resource, not created by me, online that I thought really articulated those differences. So I'm going to click on that to share. And then I probably didn't share my screen the way I wanted. So let's go this way. Change screen to this one. There we go. All right. Let's try this again. Okay, are you seeing the standards versus curriculum document? Yes or no? Perfect. Thanks, Patty, for the visual. So this document was created by
It needs to be a little bit bigger though.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Down in the southern part of the world of America, but really kind of did a nice job of a T-chart of what standards are and what curriculum is. And so I think as you all being on standards and assessment, where is our lane in terms of what the board is charged with? The board is charged with standards. The board is not generally in charge of curriculum. As you had that long discussion yesterday about self-studies curriculum, it might seem like, is that true? But ultimately, we don't dictate curriculum. We might provide resources in the curricular area unless the legislature says you need to give this curriculum. So just helpful information. Here you go. They're adopted by the State Board of Education, where curriculum is adopted by the local board. I just thought it was a really nice distinction that summarized it way better than I could. So that is a resource for you as you're trying to explain to others who might say, I really want them to read this text. That moves into curriculum. As soon as you say this particular reading is required, it becomes curriculum versus a standard. A standard is what's the learning you want to obtain, and then teachers find the resource or the reading, whatever it might be, to attain that learning to accomplish that standard. So hopefully that kind of gives a better distinction across the two pieces. And with that said, that resource is there for you as we move forward. So I'll give you an example in secondary science, not my area of expertise.
Dr. Thronson?
Yes.
I'd just like to interject one thought. I have to admit that as a board member in a local board for 16 years, I was a very dedicated parent, grandparent, interested and committed to do whatever I was supposed to do as a board member. But the first 4 years, I had zero, absolutely zero exposure to or even thought about curriculum. It did not come up in a board meeting. We had a magnificent curriculum director in Nebo School District who had been there forever, and Nedra just took care of it. And we had no idea. We had no idea that we had any responsibility to help with that process. Nobody ever talked about it. And we had plenty of bonding and building and every other issue you could imagine. So it wasn't like we were sitting around twiddling our thumbs trying to figure out. But I felt at some point that we needed to dive into understanding what our role as a local board was. And I started bringing in ideas that maybe the board had some responsibility in that. As I studied the code, I went, oh yeah, we really do. we're supposed to be approving this, and I didn't even know that there was a this. And so this wonderful comparison that you shared in this document, I wish there were some way to share that just as a resource with local boards, just to help them get jump started a little bit quicker, so that it wouldn't take 4 years like it did me to understand what our state legislature is anticipating that we as local boards are doing when it comes time for us to approve curricular decisions that are being made at the local level. So I believe in local control with great enthusiasm, but I also understand that there's a need to help our local leaders understand what they are controlling and what they have responsibilities for, just because they're well-meaning and wanting to do what's right by the kids in their district, but they really, there's enough on the agenda that we may never even put something as important as curriculum on the agenda. And if we're not doing it, boy, we better hope there is a magnificent curriculum director that is doing it. And so I'm just worried about the kids across the state, and hope that we can continue to share great resources like this to help jumpstart local boards, whether we work through LEAs directly, whether we interact with USBA and recommend strongly that there's some intense training on curriculum development and how it relates to standards that are coming down on this schedule. Maybe even suggest that they might want to get on a schedule that rather than waiting 6 years after the standard is implemented for a certain content area, if they were ready to take the standards as they came off the pipeline here and immediately do what needed to be done curricularly, so that we're kind of on the same page, on the same kind of a framework schedule. And I'm not that we can dictate that with the local leaders, but there are some efficiencies that would really be best for kids if they were to jump on board with a schedule that we have in place, so that we're passing the baton at the right times to those who have to make the curricular things happen.
Yeah, you bring up two great points. So the first one, I think we could work with the USBA and talk with Linda and others and say, hey, we've got this resource. I think additionally, putting in the code and rule references of what local boards are required to do, such as approve curriculum, when it's being adopted for whole systems, would be a great idea that we are seeing the need for in some of the parent experiences that I think are out there, as well as our LEAs have started to move. Since the board established that timeline, they have now built their budgets and their processes around our timeline. So when social studies took longer than expected, they are kind of like, we're ready to buy curriculum, but you don't have standards yet. English language arts, like they're waiting. They know this year is their English language arts year, because you can imagine in an LEA to buy English language arts curriculum just for elementary is millions of dollars. So it really takes intentional planning by their curriculum directors, such as Nedra. In Ogden School District, Adam has this, McNichol, he's their curriculum folk. And he has this beautiful spreadsheet of what standards are coming when and how they're planning for adoptions and such to go through their board. So I know our local school district leaders are thinking through that, and that's why we create that timeline and give updates to it. It's basically so the curriculum directors can stay in the loop of like, oh, wait, the board's a little behind. You're going to have a little delay in this implementation, and for them to plan ahead. Like we have showed them, math is likely to be queued for next year. So if you're adopting math curriculum right now, we might suggest you wait because you're just going to have new standards in 2 or 3 years, and they might be significantly different that you would need curriculum again. So our curriculum directors have become very efficient and effective in thinking about when they purchase curriculum in alignment with this timeline. So the timeline the board has created has actually been extremely valuable to our local leaders, but I can definitely reach out with USBA and see how we might support them in helping boards understand their roles and responsibilities related to curriculum. As we have new standards, even helping them know, here's our sequence and what you can expect and what you're probably going to see from your local leaders in terms of adoption processes. If that would be something that you are interested in, I can work with Linda and others at USBA.
Well, having had that experience of sitting in the seat of a local board member, I'm fully hopeful and enthusiastic about curriculum directors in a local district jumping on board and coordinating their schedules with the excellent work that's being done by staff here. That's wonderful, but that still leaves the local board member out of the loop without knowing that this is coming down the pipeline, and that there is a schedule and there are efficiencies that need to be addressed and at least added to their agendas and in terms of their thought processes and their planning. So I think we certainly have the staff at the local levels involved because you're connecting with them all the time. But rarely are we as a state board connecting with the local boards unless they are interested in what we're doing and they just follow our meetings, which is not always the case with local boards. So I just, anything that we can do to keep this communication going both ways when it comes to important information like standards and curriculum and assessment, I would love that so that the local board has every opportunity for success.
Well, I've written it down on my little Post-its. That's how I live in this life. And I will follow up with Linda Hanks and others and see how we might be able to support them or give them resources if they feel like this is something they can do themselves. But I agree. I think there's additional awareness needed at the local board level around responsibilities and the transparency of those processes and the public meetings required to kind of make sure people are aware when a district is going through a curriculum adoption process. So I'm going to take you to an example. So this is Secondary Earth Science Standard 4.1 on the left. This is one of our current standards. On the right is how it turns into curriculum. So great, we have this construct an explanation for how the availability of natural resources, the occurrence of natural hazards and changes in climate affect human activity. And these are examples that we have in the standards, natural resources including. So science and context, so thinking about relevant topics of the day where we can apply that standard in curriculum and actually have kids learn what that looks like would be looking at the recent events of Jackson, Mississippi and their lack of clean tap water. And so we can use that kind of current event to have these discussions and construct that explanation about how the availability of that resource of tap water is impacting the people of Jackson, Mississippi related to this standard. And so that would be as a state board, we give them standard. Teachers are looking for those kind of teachable moments of how they might execute and help students learn that standard. But we don't tell people you need to use the Jackson, Mississippi example. That might be what a teacher would leverage for a kind of relevant timeliness example. So the next piece is, okay, we've got difference between standards and curriculum. How do we actually write standards? So this is really where we go and curate from across the nation. What are other states doing? We look at other state standards. We look at the progressions of standards. There's some research done, like this skill comes before this skill. So in English language arts, when we talk about phonemic awareness, blending, segmenting, all of those things, there's a certain order to those. So as we write standards, we want to make sure we rely on the research related to how kids learn phonemic awareness as we develop our standards. So we look at the research around both the content as well as cognitive science. How do kids learn? And in literacy, explicit instruction is necessary. Kids in general don't just figure out B says B. They need to be taught B says B or says B. But in science, inquiry is a more acceptable approach in that area for a lot of things, where kids have to kind of experience the phenomena and work through it. And then some of that explicit vocabulary and language needed to explain the phenomena comes through. So kind of relying on those different pieces, instructional frameworks that might be out there. So we go out with our writing committees and kind of curate resources to look for those things. We also help to develop themes. So in social studies, you guys saw that with, we had a theme of geography, we had a theme of civics and so on, to kind of give this vertical alignment component that every grade will have those themes perhaps, but what that theme looks like in each grade has its own age appropriate kind of content. But we want that geography theme to carry through in social studies. So some of the content areas find these kind of unifying themes to lead their designs. Also grade level or course specific progressions. This again might go back to what the rule or the code requires in terms of what kids are expected to be exposed to, as well as other content connections. So how might we weave in English language arts into science? Like, are kids expected to communicate their ideas? Are they expected to provide in writing? Different ways to kind of integrate, so that, especially I was an elementary teacher for most of my career. And, you know, if I did not integrate, it was really hard to teach all of those subjects separately. How do I bring in reading a science article and engaging in that experience and also get my English language arts standards accomplished? So really trying to help facilitate standards that help with integration so that teachers help see that potential more easily. We also typically provide some resources to support in writing. So when we're writing standards, we want to have really great language that empowers a more complex and rigorous standard. We used to have a lot of standards that students will understand. Well, what does it mean to understand? It's a really poorly defined verb. And so we often give some tools to our writers to say, here are different tools you can use to enhance and make sure we have adequate complexity and rigor in our standards. So this is one tool that we've used in the past. This is from Bloom's taxonomy that really kind of takes those pieces and says, okay, if we want kids to kind of just at that basic recall level, what are the types of tasks that they might engage in? Oh, they might just label. So they've got the parts of a plant, go ahead and label that plant. That's pure recall. But then if we kind of want to say, we want you to be able to label the parts and identify the function of those parts, we're now going to be moving up the trajectory. So if we just said label, that is a standard we could have, but it's a pretty low rigor. And sometimes we might need some basic recall because it's hard to say what's the function if you don't actually know what the part is. And so those pieces, oftentimes you'll see a standard that's going to be label and identify the functions of a plant, label the parts and identify the functions. So those pieces really help to engage our writers in a higher level thinking around how the complexity of that standard can be leveraged just through thinking about how we design the language or the verb used in that standard. Now you can have a really low complexity task that's like, well, a recall question with the same verb. It really is about the verb and what comes after the verb. So just changing the verb doesn't necessarily change the complexity. We have to think about also what comes after the verb in the standard. So that's just one example of a tool that we've shared in the past. This was an example of some of the social studies skill stems that were shared with our social study writers, not necessarily to be like, this is how you write your standards, but examples. Just as many of us go and look at examples when we're writing letters of recommendation or when we're trying to work on a task and we're like, what have other people done? We go and look for those tools too to help our writers. And so this was an example of some things that we helped to share to give them ideas of what this could look like in terms of stems that create that complexity and rigor in the standards. Huss's cognitive rigor matrix is something we've used for years at the state board to really help blend DOK levels with Bloom's taxonomy. So you'll see that same taxonomy we looked at first, that's been around for, I think, 50 years. And then you have the depth of knowledge from Webb. And what Huss did is she combined them into a matrix. So if we want to be able to do kind of that recall reproduction, we're going to look here, but you can see, as I was saying with that taxonomy, you can take a low level task and move it into keeping it low cognitively rigorous in terms of that, but move it throughout that taxonomy. So you can do low-level creation. You can also do high cognitively rigor creation. And so this matrix kind of extends that. And they have these for the different content areas. There's one for social studies, there's one for English language arts. I'm just showing you the math and science to give you an example. As well as one of the pieces we spend a lot of time with our writing teams, because they might be the first grade writing team. It's insufficient to be isolated in your first grade team. What needs to come before in kindergarten? What needs to come after? And building that kind of continuous sequence of events so that as kids move up their grade levels, they're building upon what they previously learned. So oftentimes you'll see, like in a vertical alignment, we have those teams, maybe it's a K2 team that will come together and they'll look and they'll try and do a vertical alignment of those standards to make sure the prerequisite skill was taught in the prior grade. And now we're building upon that. And then it continues to get built upon in the later grades. So you'll see that I pulled up the example from our great English language arts team. And what they've been doing is we had a preschool 3, 4, and then kindergarten, because we have those standards. And then what does it look like differently at each of those grade levels? So you'll see some standards, they drop off. Like that was expected to be mastered in preschool. Now, as a teacher in kindergarten, if it wasn't, I'm still going to need to have that mastered for kids to build upon. But ultimately, it was an expectation for learning in that previous grade level. So those are different ways that we kind of help execute the writing and development of this work, relying on research, looking at the complexity and rigor of the language that we're using in the design, looking at those progressions across grade levels and within grade levels to really make sure there's coherence and consistency. You can imagine, like you guys have seen this in the standards process, when we change one standard, it can have ripple effects throughout the standards document. So it's a very intentional process when we make sense to those standards. That is it for my presentation. I tried to do, like I said, a high level, shorter introduction. So if there's any questions, happy to take those, but really just an intention to share what the difference between standards and curriculum, and then how we support our writers in developing those standards.
And as a follow-up to this, at any time a board member would like to have staff help create any of these motions in the form of standards and would like to use any of the resources available in practicing it, we are more than happy to help out with that beforehand.
Director Thronson, are
Yes.
those also going to be made available for us?
Yeah, they're linked in that same document that I used earlier. So that standard practices at the end, you'll see all those things linked as well.
I just think that's valuable as we're looking through standards ourselves. It may be beneficial either to get help or also to be able to have the resources ourselves. So thank you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely.
This is just invaluable, and I'm so grateful for your preparation for today. I know that's what you needed, was to just come up with yet one more presentation to the board, but this is going to have, I think, a very positive impact in our future deliberations together. So thank you.
My
All
pleasure.
right.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, and Chair Booth, as I was just listening to all of the hard work that went into that document that Dr. Thronson and Talia created, I'm wondering if that's even something we should put on our website about the standards process so that anyone can look at it, even our public, if they're like, well, what is all of this? And I just think so much went into that, and maybe we could update it yearly to be able to say, unless it's the same link or not, to be able to say, here's this process, and they can know exactly where we're at too. It's just so much work went into that, and I think it was very valuable.
I totally agree. And as we're trying to foster lifelong learning, let's give every opportunity we can to anyone who has an interest in this process and how they might be able to contribute and be supportive of the process at a local level or at a state level. So thank you for your hard work, and let's make it available as widely as we can. All right, Dr. Norman, now I think we're ready for the next presentation. Darren?
Okay, thank you, Chair Booth. As your assessment director, I've been been asked to prepare a short assessment for each of you to take related to the standards adoption process and standard writing. That's my poor attempt at humor, but I am grateful for the opportunity that I have to work with Jennifer and Talia. They and their staff are just outstanding. I hope you've seen a glimpse of that here today, of the complexities of the work that's done on your behalf by a large number of staff here. And I'm grateful for the opportunity that you've given me to talk about the assessment process as well. I'm going to share my screen. Patty mentioned earlier that we follow the rules to the letter. And you can see, since I uploaded my slides, I'm not as good a rule follower as others, but hopefully when I don't, I hope that it's advantageous to those who I'm working with rather than creating problems. The 3 questions that I was asked to cover in the time that I have with you today is, number 1, what tests do students take? And so we'll start out our presentation or our time together in that area. Number 2, what do they measure? What do the assessments measure? And that'll be folded in throughout our time together today. And then how are we doing? So at the end of my presentation, we'll review the results from statewide assessments that have been administered in the spring and throughout the year of 2021-2022. My slides are curated from other presentations that I've done. But to Patty's point, I've also made adjustments. So if you're comparing the slides I put on the screen to those that are in the backup, you'll probably notice there are some slight changes that I've made as I've listened to the earlier presentation to try to make the information we're going to talk about even more relevant and connect to the learning that you've experienced so far today. So as we talk about what tests do students take, I think this visual graphic is something we should spend a little bit of time on. Those of you who have experience as classroom teachers, this assessment system graphic will probably make quite a bit of sense. The general public sometimes gets these different quadrants or types of assessments confused. And so I want to talk about these a little bit. So you'll see on the bottom half, we have from left to right.
Excuse me, could you make that just a little bit bigger?
Let me see if I can. Is that
that's awesome.
Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. So on the bottom, we start in the bottom left-hand side with those that are more classroom focused and more formative in nature. Sometimes people will say, well, this assessment is a formative assessment or this assessment's a summative. Really, to know whether that's accurate or not, we need to determine how that test is being used. So the instrument itself could at times be formative or summative, but it depends on the way the tool is being used for that particular assessment. Then we get into grading, where a teacher finalizes something, and a grade on a test or an assignment or a presentation that goes onto a report card, that becomes, it's classroom focused, but it's also moves into the summative quadrant. On the top left-hand side, we'll talk a little bit later this morning about these interim and benchmark assessments. There's some tools that you provide to teachers. We've had former board member refer to these as productivity tools, teacher productivity tools. And so we'll talk about those, but these can also be things that are developed at the classroom level, or maybe more commonly, they're developed at the district or LEA level. And they're used for that specific purpose of monitoring not just the individual student now, but activities that the teachers are engaged in. And then obviously on the top right-hand side, large-scale accountability assessments. These are the tools that we'll be talking primarily about. The data that we'll display today will be primarily come from these assessments as well. So let's talk about the audiences. I see my screen has shrunk, so I'm gonna put those up and then let's expand again. There are primary audiences for each of these types of assessments that students experience in our schools, and they experience some of these outside of our schools. I took, for instance, as we talk about classroom formative assessments, I began voice lessons when I turned 50 after putting my 2 daughters through years of voice lessons. They encouraged me to join them in their learning. And my teacher would sit next to me as she would play the piano, and I would try to repeat the key that she was hitting on the piano. And if I missed it, I would get immediate feedback, and pretty soon I got to where I could recognize that I was, when I was incorrect or correct, and being able to accomplish the task that she wanted me to do. That's an example of a fully formative assessment. Now, if I had advanced to where I would go to voice competitions, that would have moved clearly into the summative, to where I stand up and sing, and then I get a score or rating, or I get a response from the audience. Grading, again, is designed more for parents and teachers and administrators. Obviously, students, particularly in the secondary school, have interest in that. I looked in my 16-year-old sons, they use PowerSchool for their gradebook tool to communicate with parents. And I looked in that this morning, and I saw results for an activity called Unit Test 2, World War II. I could see how my son did on that test, both points earned and points possible. But it's still to get more detail about that would require more information and communication between me and the teacher. And then up in the top left-hand corner, I mentioned earlier, these interim benchmark assessments, while they do provide value to students and parents, their primary purpose is often for teachers and administrators to help them make timely decisions about the instructional practices that they're engaged in, and also about the curricular choices. So again, I appreciate Jennifer talking about curriculum just prior to our discussion, because these types of tools, both the interim benchmark and the large-scale accountability, over time can give district administrators, school leaders, and then also you as board members and policymakers, important information that can help inform policies and the distribution of resources. And we'll talk more about that as we progress through our discussion. As Jennifer did, I want to highlight that assessment does have there is a legislative purpose behind assessment that's articulated in code. Let's see if I can get that back up. If I go too big, I can't read it on my screen. So I've underlined some key points under this 53E4 301.5. And you'll notice in those of you who are familiar with the way the state code is arranged, Jennifer's code around curriculum or around standards was in the 200 series. So immediately preceding the information and the directives around assessment. So to measure the effectiveness of schools and districts, to provide a tool to plan, measure, and evaluate. Again, the key here is the effectiveness of programs and to recognize excellence. And these are all program-oriented decisions. So these statewide large-scale assessments, often their primary purpose is around program effectiveness rather than individual students. So I have had 5 students who've participated in public education here in Utah. And as someone who appreciates assessment, they probably got tired of me. I would sit down with them and go through their individual score report at the end of each of these statewide assessments. And they did provide, that information did provide valuable help for me and my role as a parent in understanding my students' academic strengths and weaknesses, specifically related to the standards for English language arts, mathematics, and science. So it's not that these assessments aren't valuable to multiple audiences, but it's important to understand that the primary purpose of these large-scale assessments are often designed to help inform policymakers who don't have the privilege of being able to look into, there's not a mechanism that allows you to look into in a way that you can synthesize and analyze and make decisions around individual student tests that are occurring in our schools across the state today. Likely thousands of informal or even some of those classroom grading type assessments. That type of information, while very valuable to the student, to the teacher, and to the parent, is not as valuable to you, at least at this time. Perhaps with advancements in technology, there'll be some changes in the future. But at this point, these assessments are tools for you as policymakers. So there is a connection to the board strategic plan in assessment. It's found throughout the plan. But I highlighted a couple here early to promote high quality instruction in every early grade classroom. We'll talk about two particular large scale assessments that are designed for that. The original strategic plan also had under personalized teaching and learning, empower USB educators, parents, and students with timely, useful, safeguarded data. I'll illustrate how assessment is connected to that. And then education elevated indicators. I've highlighted those there for your benefit. These are provided through your statewide assessment system. So this one's going to be, this is going to be a hard one to blow up. This is a list of all of the assessments that are delivered through the State Board of Education. I'll blow it up and then I'll scroll around, not knowing for sure how your screen is working. And I've tried to organize it from the earliest assessment. So our pre-kindergarten entry exit PEEP, the statute is listed over on the right-hand side. The KEEP, kindergarten entry and exit assessment, that is Utah developed. Both of those assessments are Utah developed, Utah created by our educators, and then validated through the support that we have through working with the Center for Assessment and also our Technical Advisory Committee. The benchmark reading and mathematics assessments, benchmark readings have been in place since I was an elementary principal in the early 2000s. I don't remember the exact year, but they began quite a while ago when there was additional money provided for early literacy. And they've become what I would use the term institutionalized within our schools. Even before I left my time as a principal, any thought or consideration of discontinuing those would have caused great frustration from our elementary teachers because they'd begun to use the results of that particular assessment in many of their decisions that they made weekly or quarterly around their programs that we were providing on reading. Mathematics is the newest of the assessments that we'll be talking about today. We're in our second year of administering the mathematics benchmark assessments. And again, the citations, the requirements, and the elements of those tests are listed there. Then we have the one that most people, when we talk about statewide assessments, and somebody's not clear about which one they're talking about, the RISE assessment, which is administered to students in grades 3 through 8, is most commonly the one they're referring to. This one also meets a requirement of ESSA, the Federal Education Program, that the State Board recently submitted a plan, some planned amendments for. Then we have the high school assessment, which is also relatively new in Utah. The previous assessment, RISE, was prior to RISE was SAGE. It's an assessment and code that requires the State Board to develop an assessment. And this is a Utah custom build assessment as well, not an off-the-shelf test that's administered in multiple states. So it's written specifically, these are written specifically for our standards. So to the question, what do these tests measure? This one is dependent on the actions of the board to adopt and revise standards. And once that happens, your assessment team goes into immediate work with your assessment vendors. We organize teachers from across the state and we begin writing assessment questions that support measurement of those new standards. The high school assessment, though, was introduced in 2019. In a previous legislative session, there was a bill that passed that required what was previously the SAGE test, which was administered in grades originally 3 through 11. There was a change to that then introduced a 9th and 10th grade assessment, which is the Utah Aspire Plus. At the time, this was a first of its kind in the country because when we went to RFP, we wrote it in a way that allowed us to receive a variety of types of proposals. We reduced some of the constraints and we were able to come up with this innovative assessment at the time that uses some of the ACT questions. They're Aspire questions, and then it uses Utah developed items, remembering that we have the State Board owned a large bank of items for 9th and 10th grade that were previously administered to students through the SAGE test. The reason that decision was made by the board at that time was it honors the role that the State Board plays in determining the standards for the state. An option could have been at that time, the board could have purchased an off-the-shelf assessment. They could have purchased just the ACT Aspire test, which is assessment that they own and they deliver. It provides a predictive ACT score, which is one of the requirements. If you go to 53E-4-304, there are only 2 legislative requirements related to this assessment. One is the test has to provide a growth score, which we can do that with a variety of tests. And number 2, it has to provide a predictive ACT score. But in order to continue to honor the role of the state board and emphasize the importance of the standards that the state board adopts, particularly in this case for 9th and 10th grade language, arts, math, and science, this hybrid assessment was selected. And so teachers can be assured and the board can be assured that every question on the Utah Aspire Plus test is aligned with a standard in the Utah core courses that you have adopted and you have directed teachers to use to guide their instruction. Had the State Board of Education at that time adopted an off-the-shelf assessment that was not aligned with the Utah core standards, given the fact that this data is used in school accountability measures, it is very likely that the instruction across the state would have drifted and started to focus on the standards associated with those test questions. That's why I think this is something that's important to note that the state board did back in 2000, and I guess the RFP would have been 2018, but introduced to Utah in 2019 to meet the legislative requirements, but also maintain authority over standards. The college readiness ACT, probably everyone listening today is familiar with the ACT. It was around 2012, somewhere in that era, that the ACT was incorporated statewide. There was through this 305 rule, there was a year or two that it was optional, and we had pilot LEAs participate. And at the time, the LEA I was in participated in that, and then it's since become a requirement for all students. We administer that to students in the 11th grade, and that actually will start here in just about a month. There's also a tool that's been provided through legislation called SHMOOP. It's an online test prep program. It's available free of charge to any student that lives, any child that lives in the state of Utah. They don't have to be in the public school system. It's a great benefit for those who have interest in elevating their ACT score. Some parents spend significant money and resources on ACT preparation courses, and this is an attempt by our legislature to even the playing field and make sure that all students have opportunity to have test preparation program for their ACT score, recognizing that there's a student personal property right to that ACT score because it can lead to academic scholarships and also admission into certain universities. The English language proficiency or access for ELLs is required. It's actually got a civil rights requirement related to this, not just educational. Schools administer this to students who are still learning English language as they enroll in our schools. That window is open right now. It provides valuable information about the progress of students in our classrooms, and I'm hopeful that teachers are utilizing the individual score reports to customize and differentiate their instruction to these students. There's a wonderful report that comes through this that shows what each student is capable of doing based on their test score in the areas of reading, writing, listening, and speaking in English. The alternate dynamic learning maps, or DLM, that is the tool that's used to measure the alternate academic assessment standards that are being taught to the students in Utah who have the most significant cognitive disabilities. There's a small group of students, and when I say small, typically 1% of the student population or less in any community will be learning alternate academic standards. Those also have been adopted by the board, but they are not the standard documents that Jennifer Thronston and Talia modeled for you earlier today. Then the dual language immersion program. Some of you on this in this meeting right now probably have children or grandchildren who participated in this. It's a very popular program in the state of Utah. The Apple program, Apple Test, it's administered to students who are participating in that, and its primary purpose is to give parents and students who are learning a second language or sometimes a third language or more information about their progress year over year in the domains of language acquisition. And then finally, we have the NAEP, the National Assessment for Educational Progress. That assessment is also often referred to as the nation's report card. And as we conclude our time together today, I'll come back to that one and we'll talk about the value that it provides in a few different ways to you as a state board related to general oversight of the educational program in the state of Utah. I'm going to pause here and see if there are questions. Again, we'll move into the results of these most of these assessments towards the end of our time together. But are there questions about these assessments or any of the items that I've brought up at this point?
I have a question, or maybe it's a comment. This is Vice Chair Earl. I just think it's interesting in our Utah Aspire that by law, we're required to put something in place that predicts the future outcome of a national assessment. Anyways, it's just kind of interesting to think about that somehow, especially where it's not tied specifically to our standards, but we're going to create something that we require all to take that has that predictive capability. So anyways, it just philosophically, it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about and then put it into law as a requirement. Anyways, there you go. That's it. I'm not really asking a question, just making a statement.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Earl. I'll add to your statement with something for the board to think about or consider. I don't know the rationale behind the decision, which I couldn't tell you which legislator introduced the bill or the rationale behind that. I don't believe this was something that the State Board of Education had requested or pursued at the time. Angie Stallings or Superintendent Dixon or Patty Norman could probably correct me if I'm wrong. This is also a test, and we'll get to this. This is the test that the community has not embraced the same way they have the other assessments on this list. For whatever reason, and we're as your staff, we continually try to address needs and concerns from the field. But to your point, Board Member Earl, this is perhaps an assessment that as you look forward to future legislative sessions, a consideration of whether this test has realized the promise that whoever created it was hoping for. We will see that our ACT outcomes in Utah are very good. And so perhaps that's there's some correlation there. We don't have evidence to tie that either to SHMOOP or to the introduction of Utah Aspire Plus. But it is one that student participation is suppressed even post-pandemic. And perhaps it's time to revisit that one. So I'll just add that thought as well to yours.
Yeah, I just think it's hard. It would be hard to do a direct correlation between the two, even though, you know, they're similar, the intent is there. It just is an interesting thing to put in legislation. That's all I'm saying. So
are there any other questions or comments at this point in the assessment presentation? Okay, well, let's talk about, we mentioned earlier that I mentioned earlier, the state provides a benchmark and interim tools, a number of formative tools the State Board of Education provides to educators, or what one of our former, trying to expand this always trips me up. So we've put a list here of the of 7 formative tools that are provided to our educators across the state of Utah. And I'll talk just briefly about these. You can look at these later. The grades they affect, the availability, the title. Utah Compose is again available in all content areas for our grades 3 through 12. And it's designed to help teachers to help them with their proficiency and efficiency in scoring student writing work. It does use artificial intelligence to score that. Utah was one of the first states in the country back in the early 2000s, previous to 2010, that was using artificial intelligence to score writing assessments. That's not referencing Utah Compose at the time. That was the DWA, I believe, was the test that was administered then. But Utah has been on the forefront in 2014 when Utah introduced item-based computer adaptive testing in SAGE. Utah was on the front of that innovation as well. And then we're currently on the front of the innovation around using clusters to deliver and measure student learning around the standards. We do that in science right now, and that was driven by the significant changes to the science standards. But we're working forward. The contract amendments that you approved yesterday in consent are just additional efforts of your staff to keep moving forward to make sure that you have world-class assessment systems for your students in Utah. UTIPS is a tool that we have had since I was working in LEA. Teachers can create test questions, they can share test questions, and the state can put test questions in there. These are all, I should also say, all of these 7 tools are optional. There's no requirement by the board or by the legislature that teachers utilize these, but there is heavy use in some of these areas. Utah Compose gets used heavily. I can tell you the RISE benchmark modules. Utah, there were, I think, just over 1.3 million of those administered last year by teachers. Again, remembering these are optional, and they're designed to help the teacher with their day-to-day instructional activities and decisions that they make around individual students, and also as they work in professional learning communities, provide them high-quality assessment questions that have already been aligned to the core standards because they've come out of your summative bank previously, and they've been through a bias and sensitivity review. So they're highly valued by the teachers across the state of Utah. Acadian's reading, progress monitoring. This would be one where I would put an asterisk on what I just said about these are all optional. Senate Bill 127 did bring into play progress monitoring is required for certain students based on their level of reading on the benchmark assessments. My wife is a reading aide at our neighborhood school where my children went, and even as an aide, she's benefited by the information that comes to her and the students that she supports around the progress monitoring that's administered in their school. The DLM, remembering that this is specific to our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And then we have our high school benchmarks, which were delivered to, they used to be the benchmarks that we had available through SAGE. And again, once the legislation changed and required this new test, we maintained, because the investment had been made by the board previously in the legislature, we maintained those core benchmarks. If you paid attention, look closely at the contract amendment that went through with Pearson yesterday. We made a recommendation and you accepted that to discontinue funding Pearson to deliver those benchmarks. The Pearson system, we've been told, is difficult to access. As a comparison to the 1.3 million benchmarks administered in the RISE system, we've averaged about 50,000 benchmarks being administered in the Pearson system over the last 2 years. The original contract, the language we wrote allowed the state board to pull those out if use of those benchmarks wasn't sufficient. And that saves the state board around $300,000 a year. And we've moved those benchmarks into the UTIPS platform, so they're still available to our educators across the state of Utah. And then SHMOOP, we talked about that briefly before. So this next slide talks about, it answers a question. Yes, go ahead.
It looks like Board Member Klein has a question.
Okay, thank you for
Yes.
pulling that out.
Yes, thank you so much. So just a couple questions. So are the tools, the assessment tools required, or are they optional?
So let me say it in a way, and you tell me if this makes sense. So the assessment, like SHMOOP, for instance, it's delivered through SHMOOP. That's a vendor that has a tool in order to access or take advantage of those test prep, those AC test prep. The accounts are free to Utah students, and teachers can use them in their schools, but they would be required to use the SHMOOP tool to access that test. Is that what you're getting at?
So what I'm wondering is if students have a right to opt out of not just state assessments, but of state assessment tools.
Yeah, that's I appreciate that question because I should have clarified that as well. On the parental exclusion form that the State Board of Education approves each year, these formative tools, so the RISE benchmarks, the high school benchmarks, those are included on the parental opt-out form. So if they have concerns about that, because those assessments are delivered by tools that meet the definition of statewide assessment system, they are included in the parental exclusion form. Utah Compose, UTIPS, those tools haven't been defined to meeting that definition of being delivered. This is statewide assessment that's in state statute. So those are not currently on the parental exclusion form. But parents, my experience as a principal, and this again might not be the case all over, and this might be a concern that you could possibly have, is that parents have lots of rights, and as long as they're make that known to the teacher, usually there's alternate things that can be provided. But
Okay,
currently, so Utah Compose, UTIPS are not included on the parental opt-out. RISE, Cadence.
But you're saying parents can still opt out, even though they're not on the form.
Yeah, they could make that known to the school, and then work with the school to have that.
I have one parent that was told that Utah Compose was an assessment tool, not an assessment in and of itself, so that her son was not able to opt out.
Yeah,
that's what she was told by the school. So are these tools, well, you can answer that. And then just one more follow-up is, are these optional? You said they were optional. Are they optional for the students, or are they optional for the schools to use?
Okay, great. Yeah, when I used the term optional, I was referencing optional for the schools to use. And included in that, this is important to note, the State Board of Education does not collect the results of any of these assessments. So even the RISE benchmarks, I can get the number of students who've participated and the type of benchmarks they've taken, but we do not collect a data file that includes those results. That's kept at the local level.
Okay,
so
and then
let me go through this opt-out question again, though, or right to exclude. So let me go down the list. On the Utah Compose, UTIPS are not on the parental opt-out form. RISE benchmark modules and interns are. Cadence is. I can't remember if the DLM is. High school benchmarks are, and SHMOOP is not. So SHMOOP, UTIPS, and Utah Compose are not on the parental opt-out form. So that could be why you're getting a report that a student is not allowed to opt out. There's not a legal requirement tied directly to that assessment like there is to the RISE benchmarks, Cadence, high school benchmarks, or those summative tests as well.
So when schools tell parents that they can't opt out, that's not actually true, right? It's just they can, it's just not on the form. So they're being misled.
Well, there's not a legal, so yeah, there's not a legal requirement under the parental exclusion statute that would connect Utah Compose, UTIPS, or SHMOOP to a legal requirement.
The opt-out form.
Exclusion. I know there's also a parental rights bill that's also in existence that provides details and documents a number of parental rights, and then beyond a legal requirement, I know that we have. For example, when I was principal, we'd have students that would come, an elementary principal, come and participate for various things during the day and not for other things. And while they're for lunch, for instance, we'll have one student that would come for lunch. All curricular instruction would occur in their home setting. Did I have a legal requirement to provide lunch to that homeschool student? I don't know that. So when I say, my experience has been schools work with parents around their unique needs. But yeah, your answer is, the answer to you is there's not a legal requirement in the parental opt-out statute that would include Utah Compose, UTIPS, or SHMOOP. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask just a couple more quick questions? The tool scores, can the schools use those in place of the RISE or Aspire scores if the student opts out of the RISE or Aspire test?
So let me get clarity around what you mean by use those. To use those for school accountability?
Yes.
No, not at this time.
Okay, and then
let me add to that. It's typical that if a parent excludes their child from the summative assessment, they often exclude them from all the assessments associated with that product.
Okay, because that has not been the case as for many parents that have reached out to me, that they opt out of the main assessments, but then the schools require them to take the tools or use those you call them the formative assessments
Formative tools
instead, and say that they can't opt out of those. And so there's, you know, if the one is just kind of a lesser, I don't know how to articulate it, version of the main one, if they may opt out of the main one, they should be automatically opted out of the rest. And that has not been clear to parents or maybe even to the schools. And so I just wanted that to be on the record so that parents know and schools know that if they opt out of the RISE assessment or the Aspire, that any of these formative tools that are attached to that, they should also be opted out of as well.
That's very clearly identified on the parental opt-out form that you provide, the board provides to LEAs. The statute does allow an LEA to create their own opt-out form, but does expect that it contains the same content. So as you work with parents, the parental opt-out form is very clear. It's pretty lengthy. The types of the names of the assessments, they'll see benchmark and interim, they'll see RISE associated with each of those. One area where sometimes comes in on the tip line, a concern about concerns about parental exclusion, is LEAs, and you probably all are aware of this, LEAs often purchase their own assessment systems in addition to these tools. So NWEA, that's one that has some commonality around our state. They purchase that to help with their instructional decisions and planning as well. Those that are purchased at the district level and provided at the district level also don't meet the statutory requirement around the parental exclusion associated with these large-scale statewide assessments.
And Assistant Superintendent Nielsen, I think Dr. Thronson might have some additional information as well.
Okay, go ahead, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. We've just had this problem. I've had calls as well, board member Klein. And so oftentimes what the confusion is they can't opt out, it's the language. And so when a principal says you can't opt out of this, because it's not on the opt-out form, they just want to decline from participating. And so what I have found in having navigated these conversations with families and principals is it's a lack of like common language because they're not truly opt-outable, but the parent has the right to say, I don't want my kid using that. So we had that quite often in the beginning of KEEP. We have like 98% of kids that participate in KEEP, but we have a few parents that are like, please don't, or please don't share our data. You can give the assessment, but don't put the data in the system. And so KEEP is not an opt-outable test, but we have parents who say, I don't want my kid to take that, and that's respected. So I think sometimes it's just a language issue and lack of like, yeah, you can't opt out of it. It's not an opt-outable exam, but you can thoroughly not take it. I hope that helps.
Yes, okay, so the data from the district benchmarks that are aligned with state assessments, where does that data go? And as well as all the other data from the formative and summative assessments, the state assessments, where does it all go?
Yeah, so let's use a specific example that might help. So RISE benchmarks, if I have a student in school today and their teacher administers one of the RISE benchmarks, which the benchmark is probably going to be between 8 and 10 questions. It's going to be aligned with the standard that the teacher's using that day. That's collected through the delivery system that you have through a contract with CAI. That's stored in their system under the requirements of the contract that has been provided that we're working under. The teacher then has access to that through logging into the system and their permissions that are made available to them. The school administrator has access and perhaps the district. I don't know that for sure. When we receive our download file at the end of the year that will contain all the summative data, we only receive the summative data. That other data is purged under, again, the terms of the contract that exist between that vendor. Now, The example of NWEA, that contract, if I were a district who had engaged with them to provide assessment tool and platform for my teachers to use, I would have a contract with them, and the terms of that contract would dictate what's happening with that data. Who has access to it, who doesn't have access to it, when does it need to be purged?
What it's being used for?
Uh-huh.
Does it say what it's used for?
Well, typically it's restricted to access, and the vendors generally don't have any opportunity or ability. Again, you'd have to look at their individual contracts.
Yeah, there's a reason they collect data. It's not just to collect it. They do something with it.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd need to look into the terms and conditions of the contracts. If it was a district in your area, your constituents, that would be the path to get the answer to that question.
Okay, just one last quick follow-up. To Aspire, is it optional?
Utah Aspire Plus is
it optional for schools to use?
It is so Aspire, the high school, these high school core benchmarks. When you say Aspire, is that what you're talking about?
The Aspire test, is it optional for schools to use?
Utah Aspire is not optional for schools. That's in state statute that the state board has to require LEAs to administer that test, but it is on the parental exclusion form.
Okay, and then how is the state protecting students who opt out of the state mandated tests from being forced to take district benchmark tests that align with the state tests?
Yeah, so the protections around the parental exclusion that the state board has put in place are found in R277404. There's a good list of those. It's also in the testing ethics document policy, where educators are required to receive annual training and then also have a signed form on file. So those are the protections that the board has put in place around a parental exclusion for the large scale assessments. In terms of the district assessments, I'm not aware of a rule that the state board has in place that puts restrictions on LEA's ability to use those.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's talk. The next question that you probably receive or will receive at some time as a board member is, how much time do students take testing? How much time? It feels like this is going on all the time. We're testing too much. So we put this together for the finance committee a year ago to give them an update on a presentation they'd asked us to provide to them. So we've organized it on the left-hand side by grade. The title of the test, you'll see 4th and 8th grade, 4th through 8th grade is broken apart because you administer writing, and this is under state statute requirement to administer a writing test in grades 4 and 8. And so you'll see the time on that grade, even though RISE is common between 4, 6, 7, and then, whoops, it should say 3, 6, 7 there, I apologize. 4 and 8 writing, you'll see the time is different, and that's explained by the inclusion of the writing test. Also, you should note that the only time test on this sheet are the Utah Aspire Plus and the ACT. So the others, you'll see a range typically, except for KEEP and Acadience, which is more defined. Even though it's not timed, that's pretty tight on how much time typical students take. On the far right-hand side, you'll see of the 990 hours, the number of minutes, and you'll see an estimation on how many minutes that is, and you'll less than 1% on all of those state required testing. Now, the next question you might get from constituents is, well, what about the formative tests that are administered, or what about the district required assessments? And again, I'll acknowledge that there's certainly more assessment that occurs than these, and we did that to start today's presentation. There's an assessment system that supports education, and this is related specifically to those large scale assessments. Another question that comes to me and likely to you from constituents might be, how much money does the state board spend on assessment? This is really tiny. Give me just a second here. This information comes from the Assessment Solutions Group. You'll see this is 2019. I haven't provide an update. This is one I captured from a presentation of the Finance Committee before. It lists all of the states. You've got 2 lines there. One is the simple average, all assessments that a state administers, because you'll see you've seen already that Utah administers more than the minimum required assessments by the federal government. We have some that the state values. And then you've got the weighted average, which is looking at just those that are required by federal statute or regulation. I throw it here just to give you, again, this isn't a scientific, let's add up all the numbers. This is surveys that have been completed by each state. You'll see here Utah is well below the line, even though you have a large quiver of assessment tools that you provide to the teachers in our state. Utah is well below the line of both the simple and the weighted average there. Some states, they exceed well above that. And then there are some states that are lower, obviously. I'm going to pause for a minute because we're going to transition into the results, to the question of how are we doing? So before we do that, in terms of what tests are students taking and what do they measure, are there additional questions related to those two topics?
Just clarify what that graph is again for me.
This one here that we're looking at, this is the results from a survey, a national survey that this group, Assessment Solutions Group, did, trying to put together information about the cost per student of all assessment spending. So you'll see, I believe every state in the country is listed here. They've created an average, a simple average, and a weighted average. The weighted average is just those assessments that are required by ESSA or federally required. And then the simple average would be the average when you include all assessments. We just mentioned some formative tools, for instance. We have our kindergarten entry exit profile that we mentioned. That's unique to Utah. It's a Utah developed assessment that other states wouldn't have, and they likely have some of their own. So those are the two average lines. It's just cost per student. So let's get over here. You'll see in Utah, it's at least in 2019 was just about, should put a data label on there, $30 to $35 a student.
Chair, I'm just going to do a quick time check really quick. We have about 30 minutes left. We do have 2 action items, and I know this is like a really suspenseful time right now to see, well, after all of this, so what are the results? It's almost like a cliffhanger. So we can have Assistant Superintendent Nilsson keep going, or have him come back with that suspense, the next episode in our next one of our next meetings. So I will leave that up to the decision of the board, the committee.
Thank you, Natalie.
Yes, I just have one more question for you. What in current USBE policy or vendor contracts prevents us as board members from being able to see what's in these state assessments?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I guess I'm assuming you've been told that you're not allowed to see secure items. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, so there would be, there are times, so we have, as you probably know, there's a parent review committee that reviews all of the RISE items. There's some documentation that you would need to sign, certifying that you would keep those secure and private, wouldn't share them publicly. There's a great investment in those assessment items. So the Utah-owned items, I'm sure we could arrange for that. The reason I'm confused, I don't think I've ever told somebody, a board member, they can't see them. They are protected, and so there's a process for getting access to those. Your staff reviews the items as well. Releasing an item, making it so we have to throw it out of your bank, can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. So custom build.
For one question.
One item, yeah. The development process for custom build assessments is extensive, and so there's significant costs associated with that.
Is there a way for us to review those questions before they're added to the bank so that we don't have that cost of having to pull questions that are maybe not great or appropriate or accurate?
Yeah, and then one possible way is to work with board leadership to determine, the board appoints 5 parents to the committee, parent review committee. The Senate president appoints 5, and the Speaker of the House appoints 5. Those are 4-year terms, and as those roll over, That's the requirement, the minimum requirement, but as board, you could participate in the parent review portion of our work each year. If you're interested, that would be something you need to work through board leadership. I don't have the authority to make those determinations.
Who makes the final decision on what questions stay and what questions get yanked?
Yeah,
There's a review committee, but do those parents on the review committee actually get a say in what stays or goes, or is that left up to staff or whoever works with those parents on the review committee to make those final determinations?
Yeah, they definitely get a say. Each year after the parent review committee, we provide a report of what items have been flagged by parents, what the action was taken by as a result of those flags. When you talk about the final determination, it's a series of events that occur. So an item can be discarded if it's determined in content alignment, for instance, where we bring in content experts. If it's determined that question's not aligned to the content the way we thought it would be, gets discarded. So it moves on. It can go to, eventually it gets to bias sensitivity. It could be determined that there's a problem with the item under that review. It could be thrown out. Parental review could be thrown out. We administer the test questions eventually into, and I haven't included all the steps to try to be quick. We administer the test through field testing. Then we examine the outcome of that particular assessment item and see if it performed the way we expected it to. If it didn't, it can get thrown out. So when you say who has the final say, I don't know how to answer that because there's a series of steps, and along the way, an item can be discarded for a number of different reasons that it's not meeting our expectations.
Okay.
And then eventually an item, because of overexposure, over time, we remove items and then we'll move those into your formative tools, the RISE benchmarks and interims, for additional use by teachers. So they get moved out that way too.
So I've heard you say it multiple times that, they get a say and there's this process, but tell me again, who makes that final determination?
The final determination after the parental review.
After the parental review, who makes the final determination of what goes and what stays?
Yeah, your staff does.
Thank you.
Right. So I believe that we should move on to the 2 action items. And if we're able to accomplish those quickly, then we could come back to the cliffhanger, or we can do that in another meeting. I'm committed to lunch today, given the meetings that we had yesterday and the schedule that we kept. So I'm happy to go until 12:30, but let's see how quickly we're able to arrive at some decisions on the 2 action items. And then we'll continue with Darren's presentation if we have the time. We appreciate the opportunity to become more well-informed and understand more clearly what it is we're talking about, and especially appreciate the opportunity for our board members to ask questions and get clarifications from the horse's mouth. So thank you, Darren, and thanks to all of the staff who have helped us this morning understand more clearly the lay of the land. Does that sound like it's okay if we move on to the action items?
Chair, I have one more suggestion just in looking at time. It was asked by the full board yesterday that we make sure we have that committee, that the committee votes on a member to be on that grant process that was voted on yesterday. So I'm not sure, but would you like to do that first just to make sure that gets done? And then we can have the longer discussion on the meeting on the last agenda item.
Sounds fine. That's great. So we're at item 3.6. Recommendation is that the committee selects a member to sit on the RFP Social Studies Committee. So the process of how we select, we could just draw straws. We could punish somebody that it's some kind of punishment.
It
We
did
could
say vote.
reward somebody.
It did say vote. All I'm saying is they made sure that I clarified that, so.
All right.
Drawing straws
Vote.
would be okay if we voted to draw straws, I guess.
Vote to punish somebody.
Great,
Make
that's
it-
great. Natalie,
I would nominate Jenny.
great. I love that nomination.
I guess we just need, do we need a second?
I'll second that.
Great. So we've got a nomination and a second for Jenny. Do you feel that as leadership that that's too heavy of a responsibility?
I would be interested.
be
So I
interested.
would-
Great. Are there any other nominations?
I would like to remove myself from the nomination list.
If it was felt by board leadership, given your agenda, that that was too much for you, then I would nominate Emily as vice chair of this committee and let her represent us on this important RFP committee. How would you feel about that?
I would be willing to do that. Votes for Jenny, but if not, then I can do that.
I understand. So do you think we need any touching base, or do you need to touch base with board leadership to see if they feel that that's, I mean, you know your schedule. I don't have any idea of what, I do know.
You mean touch base with my husband to see if
Oh,
that's.
yeah, that'd be real.
That's
Let's
right.
put him first.
You know,
So,
I don't know what kind of pressures you're under. This will be happening soon, sooner than later, and with legislative issues and things you have to do. Leadership, you've been quite active as leadership.
yes,
leader
I've
from
been
a
involved in
perspective.
this too, so I do think that there's some, do you know what I mean? That it's not like I'm starting from scratch, so to
Right.
speak, so.
I have a recommendation.
Great.
That we vote for Jenny with Emily as a backup if Jenny isn't able to fulfill that.
I think that's a good.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. Shall we formalize that then? We've got, and will you second that, Sarah?
Second, sorry, I couldn't find the unmute.
Okay, great. So we have a motion and a second that Jenny Earl be our representative. And should it be determined with consultation with our board leadership that she might have enough on her plate right now, then that Emily would be our backup. And we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion or further information we should consider in regards to this motion? I don't see any hands, so let's vote. Everyone that is in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
I'm a yes.
Hey, great. I see your little check marks there for both Sarah and Natalie. Thank you very much. So it's unanimous that we have a great representative, and if you determine with after consulting, then we'll get the word to our willing backup here, Emily. Well, that was very efficient. Thank you very much. Natalie, thank you for that motion. Appreciate it. Let's now move to the second action item 3.5, where we have an opportunity to look at the single course revision process. Member Earl has done a lot of legwork on this. And so I would like to turn the time over to her for a moment to just present important facts that we should be considering.
Thank you. So this is specific to a single course standard. We've updated our broader what's the term I'm using? Someone can correct me, when you do a full K through 12 standard revisions. But in this case, when we have a single revision, we wanted to have a clear process in place, and specifically, and this is a direction I think board leadership will be taking over the next couple of years, is helping board members to be fully engaged and informed in what's going on. And so part of this, and also helping us at the back end when we get to the end of standards, that we're not introducing things at the end that the writing committee is not familiar with, or that we find of value or of importance. So this is the process that I'm recommending as an action item. I'm happy to, I'm sure we can take whatever revisions or word adjustments, or if there needs to be something added, and I'll just read through that. So first, it would be board members are notified by consent calendar information item during the full board meeting and by email of upcoming course revisions. They're allowed a 30-day window to submit suggestions to the writing committee. The writing committee is convened to consider appropriate laws, changes to the coursework, board member suggestions, field recommendations, and other relevant information necessary to update a course of study. On 3, revised standards are brought before the Standards and Assessment Committee meeting to be released for a 30-day public comment period. Board members may submit recommendations for public comment. And then 4, the writing committee and staff review public and board comments and make final draft modifications. And then the final step would be the Standards and Assessment Committee reviews the final draft and any additional amendments or recommendations by the public or board members. The final draft is submitted to the full board for final approval or returned to the writing committee for further consideration. I just want to talk about 2 key things here, I think, that are maybe spelled out clearly that may not have been before. The addition of allowing board members to submit suggestions prior to it going to a writing committee, prior to the course itself. And then on number 5, just kind of putting into place that if it needs to go back to the writing committee, that there is something in our process that spells that out, that can happen at a certain point so that we can get further clarification. So I don't know if there's anyone that has some additional items or any recommendations. And I don't know if there was staff that had any as well.
Great, let's go with board member Klein.
Just one comment on there, and this was apparent yesterday, and I think it needs clarification that as board members elected to this position, we get to make final amendments. And just because we make amendments or because writing committee has put something forward, if in the end we feel amendments need to be made, we have that right and obligation to bring that forward. I would ask that be added.
So are you saying at number 6?
Yes. So the final determination, the final amendments and determination are made by the board.
Okay.
What about final recommendations are made by the board and return to the writing committee? And
It
then
already says that on number 5.
Final approval. Pardon me?
It already says that on number 5, that's part of the process. But then in the end, after number 5, after that process in number 5, the board should have the final say and determination as far as amendments and approval.
So I'm wondering if that the last sentence of number 5 is 6. Does that make sense? So it's Standards and Assessment Committee reviews the final draft and recommendations by the public or board members. Oh, maybe it's not. Hold on.
Well, I would in 5, I would probably amend that even to say the Standards and Assessment Committee reviews the final draft and any additional amendments, make any additional amendments. I would add, make any additional amendments.
So maybe we're adding and may make additional amendments.
Yes.
I did it.
Okay, oh, okay. Sorry. I'm
And
looking
make
down here.
any additional amendments or recommendations
Submitted by public or board members, submitted by the public or board members.
based on recommendations made by the public or board members. I mean, board members is kind of redundant. I don't think we need to. I would just say recommendations based on public comment, since we can submit to public comment as well. So the Standards and Assessment Committee reviews the final draft and may make additional amendments based on public comment, on recommendations from public comment.
So does it?
Doesn't it just say that amendments based on recommendations by the public or board members? Does it say?
Yeah.
Already?
Yeah.
Like what she's suggesting as that sentence stands now.
We could reword it if it needs greater clarification, or we can leave it.
Be thinking about that rewording, and we'll come back to this in a second. Dr. Thronson.
Yes, thank you. I had a couple. One, what if there aren't standards already? So in step 1, it says to send them to the board. But for example, the ones we're bringing to you in March, there weren't standards already established. And we have several courses that we're actually creating from scratch standards. So can we put if available, or like if warranted, like we could skip that step if we didn't have anything, I would assume. Or that step would need to be a little different of like, what would you like to see in the standards if we don't already have standards?
So is this for just the course standards,
Yes.
not core standards?
Well, it's for the supplemental core and then the CTE course. It's for 2 different sets of those processes we have. I believe, Board Member Earl, you can clarify that.
That would be correct.
So is this process different than for the full course standards?
Yes.
Okay.
We already redid that. That's the 2023 version.
Okay.
Maybe on that edit, we could add single supplemental courses in CTE, just to be clear on ours. They're just called supplemental. But that first step, Board Member Earl, so it says.
Yeah, I'm trying to think I understand what you're saying, because we have some courses that we have available that we haven't written standards for
the
yet.
way it reads, it doesn't say you submit the standards. So maybe board members are notified an email of upcoming course revisions. They're allowed 30-day window to submit suggestions. So maybe we don't need anything, because the staff, if we had standard, we'd be like, here's what we have. And if we didn't, we are going to be building speech and debate. If you have any recommendations on those standards, please send them forth. So maybe it's already flexible enough as
I think it is, actually. You just would notify Sarah.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you.
Just, may I have a point of clarification? I'm just trying to track this in motion language. So I went down here. We have a motion on the table, which is the full 1 through 5. And then we had a motion to amend on add step 6, the board shall have final determination. That was never seconded, but instead we are, so I'm going to.
Does it need to be seconded?
No, it doesn't have to, but no, not at all. But do I need to remove that just in our notes place? And I think that what you ended up doing then is in blue, changed it to the final draft and may make, and then adding in based on, and then striking the word or. So may I remove this right here or keep it? What?
I would, let's see. The Standards and Assessment Committee reviews the final draft and may make any additional amendments. And I wouldn't actually put based on public record. We need to take it into consideration, but we don't need, it doesn't have to be based on public comment.
And in doing so, would that remove this request right here?
I still want it to say final determination. and approval.
Because it has to go to
by
the full board is why.
Okay, so you want 5 to be amended and then add the step 6.
Yes.
Okay, and then now I'm on the
Well,
next.
and final amendments as well, final amendments and determination. Or final amendments, determination and approval.
Okay, and then one more question. Sorry, some of us were up really late last night.
Right?
For have final amendments for determination and approval. So then we went to the next step, and the next step was changing this so that originally this said single course revision process. So then all of you just had a conversation about, does this mean CTE course standards or single course standards or single supplemental course standards? So in here, I just wanted to make sure I was following that. Then I heard at the very end, we don't need a determination here, but I know that Director Longhurst is looking for a clarification on which courses this impacts. So I just wanted to make sure where we were at in this conversation, so I followed it.
Good questions. Thank you very much. Is it all right if we go to Director Longhurst for her concerns? Talia.
Yeah.
Thank you. We are happy to do whatever the board directs us to. I just wanted to call your attention specifically to the CTE courses. 300 courses done in a fairly quick time frame. Adding in the 30-day public comment piece actually adds in months and months of work to our timeline. And when we're doing 80 to 100 courses in a year, that is a significant impact to staff time. Again, if that is what you desire, we will try to find a way to make it happen, but it is significantly increasing work. Let me also point out, if I may, that our courses, we have a tool built for all of the CTE courses that is open 24/7, 365 to receive input from industry, public, whomever is interested in looking at those standards, and they can provide input at any point in time, and we use that as part of our software.
Yeah.
So it feels to me like it should continue to be a separate process, that your process is already set up, and what we're doing today should not include CTE courses in terms of these steps. We can look, if we need to, at the steps that are being taken for CTE courses, but it feels to me like it shouldn't be lumped together with supplemental, whatever we've called it, and whatever the first name was that started this whole discussion. Sorry that I'm not articulating myself very well. Does that reflect what you're suggesting, Talia?
That is what I'm suggesting. We are happy to take your comments during board meetings, during committee meetings, and if you send it back to writing committee, absolutely all of that. If you want us to go to public comment specifically, we will figure out a way. I just want to alert you to the fact that it will add months and months to the timeline.
Okay. I would like to revise my number 5 before we vote on it.
Okay, great.
Solidified the language.
So let's, whatever we need to do so that this does not include CTE, that are 1 through 5 or 1 through 6, whatever we're at now, shouldn't be CTE courses. And then whether it should be single supplemental and single course, I don't know what those headings mean exactly. So we need staff to clarify what this should be referring to, what this should be called, to make sure we're not getting into some scary weeds that we may never return from. Sarah, let's hear your comment.
Yeah, I have a question for Member Klein. So I know you're going to amend your 6th one, so maybe this will change it, but so we're notified about the course revision as a board member. Then we are board members in the Standards and Assessment Committee also get to have an option to comment during the public period. And then it also goes to to board members in the committee later, and then the board still gets final approval. So I feel like there are plenty of options in there for the board to provide input. So I'm just wondering if why it's still necessary to add that 6-1, and maybe you're changing it already, and I don't even, my comment is completely useless, but I was just wondering about that.
Board Member Klein.
We can't hear.
You're on mute, sorry.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank
So
you.
I have a number 5 and a number 6, and this is
Okay.
the language it would say. So if you want to type it separate from what's already there so you can see how it's different. Okay, so number 5 would say, the Standards and Assessment Committee reviews the draft received from the writing committee and makes any additional amendments or recommendations it deems necessary, period. And then number 6, the amended draft from committee is submitted to the full board for final approval, comma, or returned to the writing committee for further consideration. Before being forwarded. Well, you know, just period. And then numbers, it still needs to say that final line that I had on for the previous number 6, where the full board makes final amendments or the final determination, the final amendments and determination.
I guess, yeah, that kind of plays to my question is that are you concerned that after that entire process, there's still going to be something that you don't approve of?
I just think that the board is elected for that reason, to make the final determination on standards. So,
okay.
Sarah, there may be an someone may submit amendments that no one moves in committee. I'm just trying to think through scenarios, right? So another board member may have amendments that actually don't get moved through committee, or what comes out of committee and is brought before the board, they may have an amendment like we saw yesterday, right? Board member Wood had an amendment that cleaned up the language more. So I guess what I'm understanding is it's just clear that those could be, that finished draft could be finally amended and sent forward. So that's all I'm thinking. I'm trying to think through the different scenarios.
Yeah.
So we could just make it a number 7. The full board makes the final amendments and determination.
I just want to make sure that I captured it because I couldn't find your previous number 6 on here. So
Okay.
the full board makes the final.
Makes the final amendments and determination.
So that is only if once it's come from the committee to the full board, there are amendments, then it goes back to the writing committee, then it would come back to the full board, right? But if it goes to the full board and it's approved and there's no recommendations to go back to the writing committee, then it's done.
It's a done deal. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I just don't want to make a last minute decision.
But if the whole board decides and votes in favor of it, if the majority votes in favor, we're good.
May I have a clarifying question as well? And this is just about implementation. So when Director Thronson was showing the document that said here's step 1, step 2, step 3, there's usually a time that's involved with it. So does each of these steps then make it an additional month, or does it make it, or are some of these combined? Like in step 12, they're doing 2 of these things. Does that make sense? So are we
No,
saying
I'm not
each one of
suggesting
these
that.
additional things is like 2 additional months for it to go here and then here, just so we can be able to follow through as staff?
Alignment.
I don't know what the timeline is for these.
Yeah, does that mean changing number 3 where it says revised standards are brought before the Standards Assessment Committee to be released for a 30-day public comment period? So that's the second window, or is it the first one with the 30-day window of the board? That one seems like that time could be shortened significantly to shorten the full timeline of getting approval on the standards.
I'm wondering, may I answer? And maybe we'll have
Please,
Talia.
go ahead,
and
sorry.
Jennifer. Yeah, we can have Talia and then Jennifer, because it'd be 2 different answers. So Talia, do you want to answer on behalf of CTE, even though this is not CTE at all? And wait, then we don't need to have you answer, right? If it's not CTE. So it's not CTE, right?
I could answer for the courses
Okay.
that are involved in that individual non-core process, which I think is what we're talking about, right? And to be clear about the question, it's the 30-day board member notification. Is that?
I think the question is this, so we added on a step 6 and a step 7 and a step 1, so three different numbers. But I'm wondering in that, does that mean 3 different steps, meaning 30 days here, 30 days here, it comes to standards, then it goes to full board, standards, full board? Or can some of these that are now isolated steps be combined into a step so that these 2 things are happening concurrently, so that it doesn't elongate the process and expand it for a few more months? That's my question.
Okay. I would say, in my opinion, these would not be combined steps. They would be sequential in order, not doing more than 1 step at a time, the way that I read it. And if I'm understanding what you're asking for, they would be 1 step at a time before we go to the next step.
So are you saying that 5 and 6 look like 2 different meetings? Am I understanding that right?
So step 5 would be in committee, then we may wait another month to get to full board. And if the full board sends it back to the writing committee, then in my understanding, it has to go back to committee again for approval to go back to the full board. So you've got the step-by-step process.
So I think that 5 and 6 would need to be combined together if we're looking at it that way, right? It's this is what could be done, and then during that meeting, they decide whether to send it to the writing committee or to send it to full board.
Right.
That's how I read that.
Right, it's not, it doesn't have to go back to the writing committee, only if.
So
the
with that in
board-
mind,
the
and I'm
committee
wondering if we,
motions to.
I'm wondering, Dr. Thronson, anything, and then I'll try and do my best in combining those, and then let me know if I'm working from this draft down here, or if
I would
working-
like them to be kept the way they are.
You want not combining them?
Mm-mm.
You want them separate, Natalie?
5 and 6. As long as the wording doesn't change, we can combine them, but I
Yeah, and I
just
would-
thought you were gonna reword it.
No, and I think it would replace, like, if we use the 5 and 6 down below, I think they should be combined together and then replace the 5 up above.
Right.
So we can, after the language is finalized today, I'm happy to put it into a document that explains like the timing, like this would be month 1, month 2, so you can see that in the next committee meeting, just to kind of finalize the language and put it into articulation of a timeline and make sure that meets the committee's desires for what this looks like in actual practice. As a staff, we end up seeing that what happens in committee just gets repeated in board. I wonder if might suggest you to propose to you all to just skip coming to committee when the standards in our minds are ready for being finished and going straight to the board. We lose a lot of time doing it in committee and then repeating many of those things in board. And that way the full board gets to weigh in as early as possible.
I would actually add to number 5 that the amendments and recommendations get forwarded to the full board.
But do you want to just
Oh.
clarify that? I'm not sure I understand what you
See it
mean.
one more time. So it
Okay,
says
so the Standards and Assessment Committee reviews the draft received from the writing committee and makes any additional amendments or recommendations it deems necessary and forwards to the board or forwards to the full board.
So we're taking off the rest of this. We're
Let's see,
taking
hang
off.
on. The amended draft from the committee submitted to the full board for final approval. So just so that it doesn't, I think it should go to the full board before going, after we make our recommendation, amendments and recommendations in committee, that we forward those to the full board before it's considered for going back to the writing committee.
So with that, I think that's my clarification. So when we reviewed the standards revision process, part of the work of the writing committee was to make sure that there was horizontal and vertical alignment. And so I think the reasons why this may have been put in here was to make sure if there was substantive changes, let's say an entire strand or something taken or removed, that if it was substantive, there would be the option for this committee to say it's not ready to go onto the full board, but it may need to go back to the writing committee if the changes were substantive to make sure that vertical and horizontal alignment still existed.
Okay,
But
that's
that
fine.
That was the
That's fine.
flexibility.
We'll just leave it the way it is.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so vote on this.
Yeah.
So we better get the comment from Dr. Thronson.
Just left the hand up too long. Sorry.
Oh, okay, all right. So no comments. Are we ready to vote? Natalie, did you have another comment?
Just that it just needs to be forwarded to the full board directly.
But I don't understand what you're saying, because it will move on to the full board, but we don't want an extra, this is a single course, so we don't want it to go back and forth 2 or 3 times. So am I not understanding correctly?
Now I think, is this gonna go to the full board? After we
Yes,
approve it, it's gonna go to them. Okay, so let's just leave it as it is for now. If there's a problem, I can make an amendment later, but I think it's fine.
Board Member Reel?
Yeah, my question is just to be sensitive to the time frame on these. Is it standard practice to have a 30-day window for the board to suggest comments to the writing committee? Or is that something that could be shortened to 15 or 14 business days or something like that? So we can tighten the timeline,
So it would just be, it's on a consent calendar item, so it'd be from one board meeting to the next. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, if the writing committee could get started earlier, I don't know if there's any way of doing that. And I don't actually know the standard practice for that. So I was just trying to be sensitive to the full length of time that it potentially could take. But if that's standard practice, I'm fine and comfortable with it, of course.
Okay, it seems to me like towards the end of the document here, it's kind of going back and forth, or I'm just not sure. So I think we better take a moment. Sorry, lunch is disappearing quickly, but let's just read. The board members are notified by consent calendar information item during the first board meeting and by email of upcoming course revisions. They are allowed a 30-day window to submit suggestions to the writing committee. So this is before the writing committee is even met. Okay, now the writing committee is convened to consider appropriate laws, changes to coursework, board member suggestions, field recommendations, other relevant information necessary to update a course of study. Number 3, revised standards are brought before the Standards and Assessment Committee meeting to be released for 30-day public comment period. Board members may submit recommendations for public comment. So I don't understand that last little bit, because now the revised standards that included the board information and their suggestions and field recommendations were brought back to our committee to be released for 30-day public comment. So that's the end. That's all we're doing there.
Yes, that's current practice.
Right.
Okay.
And so that board members may submit recommendations for public comment. I mean, that, we just said that in two, the board member suggestions and we're considering,
Well, except for one thing, you've got the revised standards. The standards haven't even been written, so people would not, including board members, would not be able to look at the actual revised
Oh, okay,
standards
okay, okay.
until, so yeah.
but we are, so does that mean it goes to the full board then?
No.
To look at those, or are you talking about the five of us that are in standards and assessment?
Anyone could submit comments during the 30-day period.
I get that.
Okay.
Right, but that's standard procedure. So do we need to say that the board members can submit recommendations? Well, of course they can. They're public. So why can't we just say the standards, we agree as a committee that it's ready to be released for a 30-day public comment, which includes our 30-day public
I don't
comment.
think it changes it to me, but
So what we're really saying is board members may submit recommendations as part of public comment, not.
Yep.
Yes, we can reiterate that. As, so maybe there's a better way of saying that, but I just was confused with the four. Okay, then the writing committee and staff review public and board comments, make the final draft modifications. Then the Standards and Assessment Committee reviews the draft received from the writing committee, makes any additional amendments or recommendations it deems necessary. The amended draft from the committee, from the Standards and Assessment Committee and the writing committee, I guess, because is submitted to the full board for final approval or returned to the writing committee for further consideration. And then finally, the full board makes the final decision or makes any approves the standard.
yeah. Makes any final amendments and approves single course standards, if we wanted to be clear.
Okay. That's today, after last night, how I would spell approve as well. Okay, boy, have we ever just done a good job here. Natalie, is that reflect what you're thinking? Oh, are you on mute? Or maybe you're not talking.
No, that's fine.
Okay. Anybody else have a concern? Okay, so we're ready to vote. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the process used. The committee recommends that the board approves the revised single course standards revision process.
Okay, is there a second? Second from Emily. Any discussion or further questions?
Patty, do I need to add as amended or not?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so the committee recommend that the board approves the revised single course standard revision process as amended.
And forwards to, yeah.
And forwards to the board for final approval.
Sounds good to me. Okay, so we have that motion. We've discussed the heck out of it. So how about we vote? Anybody, everyone, please cast your votes.
Aye.
Aye. We got
Yes.
3 ayes here in the building. And we've got an aye from Natalie and Sarah. Are you frozen? Or just looking thoughtful?
I'm a visual learner, so I was trying to draw out a map of this entire process while we were discussing. I'm voting no, but only because I think that we kind of overcomplicated it there at the end, and I sort of like the original amendment with a few changes originally, but it doesn't matter anyway, so.
Okay, so thank you for expressing yourself, and we do appreciate and honor your concern. I'm sorry if I complicated matters somehow in reading it.
No, that was helpful. That was helpful. No.
Okay, so we have 4-1. Sarah is the no vote, and so that passes, and it will now go to the full board for their approval. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so, sorry we didn't get the cliffhanger, but we do have a few minutes, just a few, to eat some lunch. And so this meeting is adjourned. And thanks to everybody for their hard work in preparing for and executing this meeting.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
all of your input.
Thank you.
Thank you.